And C-SPAN 3 live this morning on Capitol Hill for a hearing on prescription drug prices. It's being held by the Senate Finance Committee. Testifying today, the CEOs of major pharmaceutical companies at the witness table, including AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley there, the chair of the Finance Committee. The ranking member is Ron Wyden of Oregon.
I want to welcome and to thank our witnesses for being here. We know that you put a lot of hard work into it, and the staffs and the senators have done the same thing. The information that these witnesses will share will help inform the committee as it addresses the issues of high prescription drug prices. America has a problem with the high cost of prescription medicines, whether it's about EpiPen, insulin, or other prescriptions. In the thousands of letters that I've received, Iowans have made clear that high drug prices are hurting. I've heard from people about skipping doses of their prescription drugs to make them last until the next paycheck. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but rationing's one medicine doesn't sound like the safe prescription for health and wellness that Americans want. Others have told me about leaving their prescription on the pharmacy counter because it costs too much. There's no question that researchers and doctors have developed treatments and cures for diseases where they were once no such cures or treatments, and such innovations take time and money. I think all of us at this table and most people that aren't at this table, if they study at all the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA process, we know it takes time and money. But we're all trying to understand the sticker shock that many drugs generate, especially when some of these drugs have been around for a long, long time. There is a balance then between incentivizing innovation and keeping prices affordable for consumers and taxpayers. And the taxpayers are involved because the federal government is a great purchaser of drugs through a lot of health programs. Like all systems, things can get out of balance. The good news is that we're here to discuss solutions, and we thank all of you for cooperating with us in that effort today. In fact, we're here today thanks to a system of checks and balances that's within our Constitution. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to be a meaningful check on the spending of taxpayers' money. That responsibility includes not just holding hearings, but also holding the private sector and the government accountable through oversight. Just like a doctor, that doctor has to properly diagnose a disease before it can be treated. Congress needs to understand what's going on in the drug pricing supply chain in order to respond in a measured and effective way. As part of that fact-finding, as of the last Friday, Ranking Member Wyden and I launched an inquiry into the high cost of insulin. This hearing is not about scapegoating any one group regarding high drug costs. That's why we're holding a series of bipartisan hearings on this issue. Without a doubt, drug pricing is a complex issue. But I think we should also be asking whether or not it is too complex or whether it should be so complex. We cannot allow anyone to hide behind the current complexities to shield the true cost of drugs. And we shouldn't turn a blind eye to industry's practices that thwart laws and regulations designed to promote competition and generic drug entries into the marketplace. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, FDI Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, and the Federal Trade Commission have identified a number of tactics that undermine competition, like withholding samples, pay for delay, product hopping, and rebate bundling. And that just names a few. While these agencies are taking enforcement action or looking at regulatory changes, we here in Congress are exploring legislative options to deter companies from engaging in these practices that keep drug prices high for patients. Today, we expect open, honest answers from the pharmaceutical industry to figure out how we got where we are today and see what ideas they have to make things better. One of the first things that we need to talk about is pretty simple: list price. Now, you folks are probably going to tell us it's not that simple. Secretary Azar has said that pharmaceutical companies believe that the list price is meaningless. In fact, some of your testimony today will echo that. However, for a patient taking a drug that has no competition, the list price then becomes very meaningful. For seniors on Part D who are paying coinsurance as a percentage of list price, then for that person, list price is very meaningful. For people who have high deductible plans and pay thousands of dollars towards the list price, then for those people, the list price is very meaningful. For pharmacy benefit managers, providing drugs with a high list price can be more attractive than providing a less expensive drug. Therefore, for the taxpayers, then, the list price becomes very meaningful. We've all seen the finger pointing. Every link in the supply chain has gotten skilled at that finger pointing. But like most Americans, I at least, and I think you'll find most members of Congress, are sick and tired of the blame game. It's time then for solutions. One way or another, we're going to get some clarity. The American people deserve straight answers and real solutions. On that note, I want to remind each of our witnesses that it's a crime under Title 18, Section 101, to provide false testimony to Congress. I thank you all for coming. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to note at the outset our focus on bipartisanship. We began that with our effort to go after price gouging with hepatitis C. Recently, we've gone after manufacturers ripping off Medicaid. You noted our intervention to look at insulin prices that just soar and soar and soar some more. So I just very much appreciate the fact that we're tackling this in a bipartisan way. Colleagues, prescription drugs did not become outrageously expensive by accident. It's not the result of a system too complicated for Americans to understand. Drug prices are astronomically high because that's where pharmaceutical companies and their investors want them. The brakes have come off pharmaceutical pricing, and American families are hurtling along in the passenger seat, terrified about what comes next. Today, the committee is going to hear about uplifting stories and miracle cures. Yet it's morally repugnant when patients can't afford those miracles. It's morally repugnant when ailing patients are forced to choose between filling the next prescription or putting food on the table because they can't afford both. It is morally repugnant when patients are forced to skip doses. Pharma executives, all of you that are here today, are here because the way you've been doing business is unacceptable. 10 companies accounted for half of all the profits in the healthcare sector last year. 9 of them were drug manufacturers. All but one of today's witnesses represent companies on this list. Drug makers behave as if the patients and the taxpayers are unlocked ATMs full of cash to be extracted, and the shareholders are the customers that they value above anybody else. So I'm going to go through a short list of examples, starting with AbbVie, that manufactures the top-selling prescription drug in America, the arthritis medication Humira. Over 6 years, the company doubled the price of a 12-month supply from $19,000 to $38,000. Can the patients opt for a less expensive alternative? They can't, because AbbVie protects the exclusivity of Humira like Gollum with his ring. Thick cobwebs of patents and legal tricks and shadowy deals with other drug makers. All of them are in place to keep the cash flowing. Now, I also want to address some very troubling information we just got. AbbVie's proxy statement. It's a document every publicly traded company has to file with the SEC. Page 37 shows that in 2017, a portion of CEO Richard Gonzalez's multi-million-dollar bonus was directly tied to sales of Humira. It appears the same incentive was in place in 2015 and 2016. In fact, the committee's review shows that all of AbbVie's top executives had the same arrangement. Mr. Gonzalez is welcome to respond, but the implication ought to be clear. From top down, AbbVie's leadership had reason to keep pushing prices and sales up. Now, Pfizer, that company gets first prize for the emptiest pricing gesture in 2018. After Stern Trump tweets, Pfizer said it would temporarily freeze the prices. But once the president got his splashy headlines, his gaze went elsewhere. Pharmacy's former CEO told investors it was back to normal. Another round of price hikes in 2019, including the pain medication Lyrica. Lyrica has increased 163% in price since 2012. Just one drug allowed Pfizer to pull in $4.5 billion in 2017. Merck gets second prize for emptiest pricing gesture of 2018. They made sweet-sounding promises after coming in under criticism, but they cut prices for drugs that essentially produce no revenue for the company. Left untouched were the cash cows, Keytruda and Januvia, which account for more than a quarter of the company's revenue. It's like promising car shoppers a great deal, except the only discounted model on the lot is an Edsel. Sanofi. This is a company wringing more and more cash out of people with an incurable disease. In 2010, a vial of this insulin cost less than $100. In 2018, it cost nearly $300. The company raised prices again in 2019. Considering the landmark breakthrough on insulin came early in the roaring 20s, nothing could justify this sudden price hike a century later. Diabetics who can't afford the costs now self-ration and endanger their lives. But you know what? The investors are happy. AstraZeneca, a lesson in saying the quiet part out loud. In an interview earlier, the CEO complained that his $12 million salary made him the lowest paid CEO in the whole industry, and he said it was annoying to some extent. His company, meanwhile, continues to raise the price of Symbicort, its $3 billion asthma drug. For some asthmatics, being able to breathe costs hundreds of dollars a month. And Johnson & Johnson gets the record today for flip-flopping. This January 7th at the J.P. Morgan Health Conference, the CEO said the pharmaceutical industry needs self-policing on prices. That sounded good, but 3 days later, the company hiked the prices of hundreds of its drugs, including drugs that account for billions in Medicare spending. And finally, there's Bristol-Myers Squibb. In 2017, the company spent roughly $11 billion on dividends, stock buybacks, marketing, sales, and administrative costs that roughly triple the amount spent on R&D. Now, I'm going to close by saying I want us to compare these concrete examples of two-faced scheming and profiteering with the central arguments that we are going to get this morning. The central argument is basically from pharma, the fault is always somebody else's. The health plans are at fault. The pharmaceutical benefit managers are at fault. Regulators are at fault. What we know for certain is the history that pharma CEOs always say somebody else is at fault. And we're also going to hear that the list price doesn't matter, that the true costs are just so complicated. But companies don't set and raise list prices for fun. Those prices are directly tied to the amount patients pay out of pocket at pharmacy windows from sea to shining sea. They're directly tied to what taxpayers spend on healthcare programs. Then drug makers point the finger at middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers. I have said for years, these pharmacy managers are wasteful and secretive, take their cut without proving their worth to anybody. They're going to have their day before the committee, too. But those pharmacy managers don't set list prices. The manufacturers do. And by the way, the manufacturers don't offer rebates for nearly 40% of Part D brand name drugs. Those prices are going up. That's on the drug companies, not on the pharmacy managers. We're also going to hear that any changes in business as usual hurt research and development. A quick look at company finances shows that that's a fable. Revenue generated from American patients alone dwarfs what they spend on R&D worldwide. Drug makers spend as much, if not more, on those exhilarating TV ads and office-to-office salesmen as they spend on research and development. And if lower prices would diminish R&D, why don't costly dividends? Why don't stock buybacks? Is the stock price more important than inventing that next miracle cure? Even if you buy the specious argument that a drug price's list price at launch is driven by research costs, what could justify arbitrary price increases year after year, long after the research and development spending is done? Finally, we're going to hear about how patients can get coupons. But if this was so generous, why can't drug companies just lower prices across the board? I believe it's just more slick branding. Branding that allows companies to keep the status quo cash cow rolling along. I'll close with this. I was there when 7 big tobacco CEOs testified in a committee room just like this one. They lied that day. This committee, the chairman and I, expect better than that this morning. Your profits are outsized compared to others in the industry. You get a massive portion of your revenue from American taxpayers, and you bear none of the consequences of these skyrocketing prices. It is long past time to drop the excuses and take concrete action to make medicine in America more affordable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Now I will introduce our 7 witnesses, but once again to thank you for participating in this very important hearing and a very important topic. We're grateful for your participation and cooperation with our committee. The first witness is Richard Gonzalez, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of AbbVie, Inc. Then we will hear from Pascal Soriot, DVM, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of AstraZeneca. Then we will hear from Giovanni Carforia, MD, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Bristol Myers. Then Jennifer Tobert, Executive Vice President, Worldwide Chairman of Pharmaceuticals for Johnson & Johnson. Kenneth C. Frazier, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Merck & Company. Albert Bourla, DVM, PhD, Chief Executive Officer of Pfizer. And Mr. Olivier Brandicourt, MD, Chief Executive Officer of Sanofi. We welcome all of you, and we'll start in that direction. And you've been given 5 minutes, and I don't gavel you down at the end of 5 minutes, but I wish when the red light would come on, you would start to summarize if you haven't finished. So we'll start with Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Wyden and members of the committee. I'm Richard Gonzalez, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of AbbVie, a company dedicated to developing new innovative medicines for some of healthcare's most challenging diseases, such as cancer, Alzheimer's, viral infections, and autoimmune diseases. Since our inception in 2013, AbbVie has invested approximately $50 billion in pursuit of that goal. However, because we are tackling some of medicine's most challenging problems, solutions don't come easy, nor without significant risk. Where we have succeeded, we have been able to provide cures for fatal diseases like hepatitis C and significantly alter the disease progression for certain cancers, lessening the burden of illness on patients and on the healthcare system. This is what the 30,000 employees of AbbVie are dedicated to doing. We agree that access to life-saving medicines is a critical issue, and we look forward to sharing our perspectives with you. There is no one solution to this complex issue, but AbbVie is committed to working with the committee and others on how we can better partner in your efforts to address pharmaceutical pricing and access. AbbVie and the rest of our industry must play a role in solving these issues and be prepared to work together with the insurance industry, the administration, and you to find a better path for American patients. My remarks today will focus on one aspect of this inquiry, the Medicare Part D benefit design, which even after pharmaceutical list prices are lowered, still contributes to making innovative therapies cost prohibitive for many Medicare patients. In general, the Medicare Part D program has worked well. Its market-based structure and utilization of formularies encourages competitive price discounts that have yielded significant savings to the government since the Part D benefit went into place back in 2006. However, despite these cost savings, Part D patient out-of-pocket costs have significantly increased. Some would blame that solely on high drug prices, and we agree that price should be part of the discussion. But it's also important to acknowledge that science has enabled us to advance the standard of care far beyond what was possible when the Part D benefit was originally designed. Many of today's specialty medicines offer significant advancements in treating or curing serious, chronic, or life-threatening conditions and save significant amounts of money for the healthcare system by decreasing overall healthcare cost. yet these therapies are also costly. Due to the structure of the Part D benefit design, patients are charged out-of-pocket costs on a medicine's list price, which does not reflect the market-based rebates or discounts that Medicare receives. We're encouraged by the proposed rule that would reflect manufacturers' discounts in patients' Part D out-of-pocket payments. This is an important step in the right direction, but we believe more must still be done to help Part D patients. Let me give you a recent real-world example that demonstrates the challenge with the current Part D benefit design and why the focus solely on list price does not fully address the access challenges. An uncured hepatitis C infection leads to downstream medical costs for surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation for patients who progress to needing a liver transplant or having liver cancer. Today, we can cure hepatitis C with drugs. This cure is highly cost-effective for the overall healthcare system. In 2017, AbbVie launched Maverick, a highly effective cure for HCV. At the time, the list prices for the competitive alternatives were as high as $94,500 for the most commonly prescribed treatment duration. We launched Maverick at a list price that was 72% lower. But even though we cut the list price of an HCV cure for most patients by 72%, Medicare Part D patients' out-of-pocket obligations are still too high for many patients to access this medicine. We believe it is important that discussions about access and affordability include a focus on how to alleviate Medicare Part D out-of-pocket burdens above and beyond just lowering list price. We are prepared to step up and discuss how companies like ours can shoulder more of the burden of the patient out-of-pocket expense, as we do in other areas. We believe AbbVie, the rest of the pharmaceutical industry, and the insurance providers should come together with the administration and you to work towards solutions that make life-changing medicines more affordable to Part D patients. I can assure you AbbVie is committed to doing its part, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Mr. Surratt.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wade, and members of the committee, good morning. I appreciate the invitation to address concerns regarding the pricing of medicines in the United States. My name is Pascal Sorio, and I'm the CEO of AstraZeneca. Our company is dedicated to science and innovation, and in 2018, we invested nearly $6 billion in research and development, 28% of our product sales, which is well above the industry average. In the past 2 years, our commitment to R&D has resulted in 18 significant FDA approvals and 5 breakthrough designations. However, I know that these statistics are meaningless unless patients can actually afford our medicines, and those medicines reduce overall healthcare costs. I'm here to discuss how we can work with other stakeholders to take specific actions that address pricing concerns. My first proposal is that we move away from the current rebate system while continuing to work with payers and PBMs to ensure robust negotiations. The current system is built on high list prices coupled with rebates. This is not sustainable, and all of us have a role to play. For example, estimates for 2018 show that across our medicines, our average rebate is nearly 50% of our gross revenues in the US. Despite this, in recent years, in our primary care portfolio, we have seen flat to declining net effective prices for most of our medicines. As a company, upon government action, eliminating rebates in commercial and in Part D, we're prepared to reduce our list prices by an equivalent amount of rebates, less the appropriate market-based fees to those in the supply chain. This would actually reduce overall costs, not only for patients, but also for the government. My second proposal is that if a change of the current system is not possible, a portion of discounts and rebates could be used to create out-of-pocket caps for Medicare patients. This approach is used successfully in some other countries and actually gives patients greater certainty in their out-of-pocket costs. Third, I believe that value-based agreements have the potential to transform how medicines are priced and reimbursed in the US. In our own value-based agreements, the price of a medicine is directly linked to the value it provides to patients, to payers, and to the healthcare system. For example, last month we announced an agreement for University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Medicare patients who are prescribed Brilinta. This innovative contract directly reduces the cost for patients, and it ties price to clinical value, basing our payments on patient outcome. These types of agreements can be especially effective for medicines where there is limited competition. As an example, for one of our oral oncology medicines, we agreed to reimburse a large payer for discontinued use because patients didn't respond to treatment, and we have reimbursed the payer under those agreements 20% of the time. To that end, I appreciate the support of Senator Warner and Senator Cassidy for value-based agreements, as demonstrated by their request for input on the Patient Affordability, Value and Efficiency, the PAVE Act. My fourth proposal is that we must encourage biosimilars and eliminate policy and commercial barriers to their greater use. Biologics are actually making very important contributions to medicine, and I believe a vigorous biosimilar market would reduce costs like generics do for small molecules. In fact, biosimilars have gained up to 85% market share in the 5 largest countries in Europe, and the average biosimilar discount is between 40 and 80%. In closing, I would like to emphasize my strong commitment to addressing the concerns raised by the committee. I believe that we can work together to find solutions that continue to allow manufacturers to innovate while creating a more efficient and a more affordable system. There are no easy answers, it's very clear, but we want to be a constructive partner. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Mr. Cafario.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the 24,000 employees of Bristol-Myers Squibb. I look forward to working together to align incentives to ensure all Americans have access to the medicines they need. I am a physician. I joined the pharmaceutical industry 30 years ago because of the impact companies like ours have on patients. We should all be proud that American companies lead our industry. Our researchers have contributed to the development of medicines that have reduced mortality from cardiovascular disease, helped transform HIV/AIDS into a chronic disease, and are now making significant progress with the treatment of cancer. Just 10 years ago, the idea of harnessing the immune system to treat cancer was viewed with great skepticism. But our researchers saw the promise of that approach and ignited an era of scientific innovation that has changed survival expectations in multiple tumors. Prior to the availability of immuno-oncology treatments, only 25% of patients diagnosed with metastatic melanoma were alive after 1 year. Today, thanks to immuno-oncology therapies, that number has increased to 74%. The potential of this approach has also been seen in lung cancer, kidney cancer, and many other difficult-to-treat tumors. These patients now have a chance for quality and long-term survival. But not all patients respond to current immunotherapies, and so we must do more. We recently opened a new facility dedicated to investigating what we call immuno-oncology resistance, and we continuously seek external innovation to augment our pipeline. In fact, in this context, we recently announced our plans to acquire Celgene. Our goal is to bring together the drive and dedication of 2 science-driven companies to do even more for patients. As a physician, I do recognize that medicines are only helpful if patients and healthcare systems can afford them. We share the committee's concern with escalating healthcare costs and believe that our responsibility extends to ensuring patients have access and can afford our medicines. For this reason, the average net pricing across our U.S. portfolio of medicines increased by 5% or less year-over-year for the last 5 years. Importantly, it did not increase at all in 2018, and we expect that it will not increase in 2019. Despite this fact, we do recognize that patients' out-of-pocket costs continue to increase. We believe it is possible to work together to realign incentives to ensure patients can afford medicines without stifling scientific innovation. So what are the solutions? We are supportive of the proposed rule aimed at reforming the rebate system with a focus on what is best for patients. We need to ensure more generics are available whenever permissible under our system. We support value-based purchasing arrangements that tie payments to value. These models can reduce costs, improve access, patient adherence, and contribute to better outcomes. We applaud efforts by Health and Human Services and this committee in all of these areas. We do believe the US should not adopt policies that stifle innovation in other countries. Outside of the US, reimbursement of new medicines often takes more than 2 years. For example, nearly 4 years ago, our Opdivo and Yervoy regimen was first approved to treat metastatic melanoma in the US. Today, 6 of the 16 countries included in the International Price Index proposal still do not provide reimbursement for this combination, which is the standard of care for the treatment of this cancer. This is why we do not support the proposed International Price Index model for Medicare Part B drugs. I would like to leave you with a few thoughts. First, we recognize the need for change. We are witnessing a historic era in biomedical innovation. American research-based companies are leading the way to help patients whose diseases cannot be adequately treated with today's medicines. But we must ensure patients have affordable access to new innovations. And we should work on policies that support and reward access and these investments. I look forward to working together to implement real change that broadens access to innovative medicines for patients. In closing, on behalf of my colleagues at Bristol-Myers Squibb and the patients we serve, my sincere thanks for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Taubert.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wyden, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Jennifer Taubert, and I lead the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson. We focus on discovering and developing transformational medicines for some of the world's most challenging diseases, including multiple myeloma, prostate cancer, HIV, schizophrenia, and Crohn's disease, among others. Like many of you, I know what it's like when a loved one faces serious illness. My own mother died of lung cancer while in her 40s, and at that time, there was very little that could be done for her. I've committed my career to bringing families hope. Hope for years of life, for the chance to be there for a daughter's wedding, or for a grandson's birth. Janssen invested $8.4 billion in research and development last year in the search for medical breakthroughs, making us one of the world's top R&D investors in any industry. In fact, our investment in R&D last year was 86% more than we spent on sales and marketing. And this substantial investment is changing lives. It's helped turn HIV from a death sentence to a manageable disease. Our targeted cancer medicines have helped patients with some of the most deadly cancers live longer, in some cases for many years. Medicines not only help patients and families, they also help lower overall health care costs by keeping people well, preventing the need for expensive procedures and hospitalizations. But medicines can't make a difference if the patients who need them can't afford them. We understand the concerns about the cost of health care. Our approach recognizes our responsibility to patients today and patients tomorrow. Patients today need access to our medicines. Patients tomorrow count on us to deliver cures and treatments for the most challenging diseases. When we price our medicines, we balance the value to patients, the importance of affordable access, and the importance of developing future breakthroughs. The list price is a starting point that's reduced by required discounts to government programs and rebates to payers, so they'll grant access to our patients access to our medicines. Last year, our discounts and rebates amounted to $21 billion, and our net price decreased 6.8%. Unfortunately, while our overall price decreased for the past 2 years, patients have seen their out-of-pocket costs go up. One reason is increased enrollment in health plans that require patients to pay more for their prescriptions. As one recent analysis shows, patients are required to pay 13% of overall pharmaceutical costs versus only 3% of hospital costs, even though medicine can help keep patients out of the hospital. Above all, we need an American solution to this American challenge. We must ensure that today's medicines are affordable, while at the same time preserving the innovation that has delivered so much and promises even more. We must maintain the hallmarks that make American healthcare remarkable: access to innovative therapies, personal choice, and doctors and patients making decisions based on what's right for each individual. At Janssen, we're committed to being a part of the solution. We believe open dialogue is essential. That's why in 2016, we began issuing the Janssen Transparency Report, sharing information about how we invest our resources, price our medicine, and help people access them. And we recently announced our plan to include list price and potential patient out-of-pocket costs in our direct-to-consumer TV advertising. In the same spirit of open dialogue, we've consistently brought forward ideas and perspectives to both Congress and the administration to fix what's not working while preserving what is. We've included more details in our submitted testimony, but I want to touch on a few points today. First, while Medicare Part D is working for many seniors and has been effective in containing costs, we believe an out-of-pocket cap is a needed protection. Second, in Medicare Part B, we've proposed options that would allow Medicare to continue to achieve negotiated savings through market competition while reducing costs. And third, we support rebate reforms that ensure patients benefit from the negotiated rebates and discounts, $150 billion in total in 2017 alone. And as a result, have patients see lower out-of-pocket costs at the pharmacy. We're on the verge of extraordinary progress that could change our lives and the lives of our children and grandchildren. At Janssen, we're committed to bringing that promise to life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Frazier.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. Merck's mission is to save and improve lives around the world by bringing forward breakthrough medicines and vaccines. Research is at the core of Merck. Last year, we invested $10 billion in R&D, 23% of product sales, and we've invested nearly $70 billion over the past decade. Over the last 5 years, we've also made capital investments of over $5 billion in the United States, and we plan to invest more than $9 billion more over the next few years to increase manufacturing capacity and to open 2 new research centers in the United States. We go where the science leads us, which means we don't focus only on diseases in wealthier countries. For example, we're proud to have deployed 70,000 doses of our experimental Ebola vaccine in the Congo, working in partnership with the United States government. The goal is to save lives, even where no viable commercial opportunity exists. We do all this to serve patients. We fully understand that U.S. patients are having a harder and harder time affording the medicines they need. While medicine costs are growing at the slowest rate in years, our patients are too often being asked to pay more out of pocket. I'm here to suggest some ways that together we can address this problem. First, we want to be clear that our industry has a duty to be responsible in our pricing practices and to contribute to solutions that address patient affordability. Merck has a history of responsible pricing. We publish information about our prices and the rebates and discounts we provide to payers. Last year, we pledged that we will not increase our average net prices for our portfolio by more than the rate of inflation annually. Second, we must ensure that patients get the benefit of these large rebates and discounts. The incentives in the current system are badly misaligned, with the growing gap between list and net prices creating incentives to favor products with higher list prices. This misalignment hurts patients because their cost sharing is often based on the list price of a drug. We urge you to support action to ensure that patients benefit from these discounts. Third, we can significantly reduce drug spending for patients in the healthcare system by ensuring that we have a viable biosimilars market in the United States. We urge Congress to encourage and support greater biosimilar utilization. Fourth, we believe that prices can better align with a drug's value when manufacturers and payers are able to negotiate innovative contracts that base payment on a drug's benefits. We need to move to this type of system, but there remain major regulatory and operational obstacles to such value-based arrangements, which we urge Congress to address. We agree that manufacturers should be rewarded based on the value that our therapies deliver. Fifth, we support efforts to encourage generic competition. A version of Chairman Grassley's CREATES Act and similar policies could make needed reforms to encourage generic competition and ensure there is no inappropriate gaming of the system. We also support eliminating coupons in cases where brand name generic competition exists. Finally, we would like to work with the committee to find ways to end price gouging by some who excessively increase off-patent drug prices where there's no competition. These high prices hurt patients, and they don't create incentives for research. These changes could bring real relief to today's patients while preserving the incentives to invest in tomorrow's breakthroughs. Decades of research investment are now yielding life-changing discoveries. If we damage the biomedical ecosystem that thrives on these investments, we'll surely limit what can be achieved for patients in society. The single most important thing we do at Merck is to persist in making large and risky investments in R&D that allow our thousands of researchers to sit at their lab benches to try to create something transformative, despite the overwhelming odds that their efforts will not succeed, since more than 9 out of 10 compounds fail. I'd like to end on a brief personal note. My mother died when I was a child, and my siblings and I were raised by my father. He was a giant in my life, and I was devastated when Alzheimer's took him away from us. Last year, after spending many years and over $1 billion, Merck had to end development of a promising Alzheimer's therapy because it didn't work. Yet we continue on seeking better approaches, and I truly believe that Merck or one of the other companies at this table will find a medicine that will avoid the pain of seeing a loved one taken away from them in this way. This vital work depends on having a U.S. market that is free, competitive, and predictable. We must work together to solve the affordability challenge of today's patients without jeopardizing the hopes of those waiting for tomorrow's cures. The changes I've discussed today have the potential to vastly improve the market while lessening the financial hardships many people face. I am here to pledge Merck's cooperation with you in creating such changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Now, Dr. Berla.
Good morning. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation. My name is Albert Bourla. I have been with Pfizer 26 years and just last month became its Chief Executive Officer. I have to say that today I'm particularly humbled to take part in such an important policy discussion within the United States Senate. When I immigrated into the United States 18 years ago, I could never have imagined such an honor. In that frightening moment, when you hear that you or a loved one has been diagnosed with a serious disease, one question comes to mind. Is there a treatment available? The answer to this question will change your life. Happily, the answer increasingly is yes. New breakthroughs are coming quickly to treat many difficult and devastating diseases. But these breakthroughs won't do anyone any good if patients can't afford them. And unfortunately, the horribly misaligned incentives within our healthcare system often makes medicines unaffordable for American patients. We need to fix this. Today, we would like to propose 4 ideas to drive meaningful savings for patients. The first idea is passing all rebates to patients. Pfizer supports a system in which transparent, upfront discounts directly benefit patients, rather than a system which rebates are swallowed up by the supply chain. In the current system, for example, none of the approximately $12 billion that Pfizer paid in rebates in 2018 found its way to American patients. If the proposed rule to share rebates with consumers at the point of sale is finalized, we estimate that seniors taking Pfizer medicines could save hundreds of dollars per year, on average. The second idea is less value, less pay. Imagine a system where Pfizer gets paid based on the number of heart attacks we prevented, rather than on the number of pills we sold. In such a system, if our medicines do not produce good results, we should be paid less. And if they do, we should be paid more. Such value-based payment arrangements, if done correctly, can align the interests of patients, insurance companies, and biopharmaceutical companies around one shared goal: ensuring positive health outcomes for patients. I understand that several members of this committee are working on legislation to pave the way for these types of arrangements, and we applaud this effort. The third idea is around capping seniors' out-of-pocket medicine costs. Patients are increasingly being required to take on a disproportionately higher share of their medicines costs. Today, patients pay on average 14% of the cost of their medicines, but they pay only 3% of the cost associated with hospital stays, for example. This is forcing patients to forego taking needed medications or to limit their doses. This is bad, not only for patients, but also for overall system cost. Patients who do not take their medicines often end up in the hospital, costing much more to the system. An important first step is capping out-of-pocket costs seniors experience in the Medicare drug program. And the fourth idea is to knock down barriers to lower-cost biosimilars. Others have spoken about it. Adverse incentives that favor higher-cost biologics are keeping biosimilars from reaching patients. In many cases, insurance companies decline to include lower-cost biosimilars in their formularies because they would risk losing the rebates from covering higher-cost medicines. I can't think of a more concerning example of a broken system, and we need to do something about it. In closing, Pfizer is all about breakthroughs that change patients' lives. This is why our more than 90,000 colleagues, many of whom work in laboratories and manufacturing plants in states represented by members of this committee, come to work every day. And it is why we are here today, to work with you and all stakeholders to find ways to ensure we can continue to discover medicines that can change patients' lives.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Brandicourt.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Senate Committee on Finance to discuss pharmaceutical pricing, affordability, and patient access. I'm Olivier Brandicourt, the Chief Executive Officer of Sanofi. I understand the anger about rising out-of-pocket costs for many medicines, including insulins. I appreciate the confusion as to why patient costs continue to rise, even when the amount that PBMs and health plans pay declines. This situation is unacceptable and unsustainable for too many patients. My goal today is to have an honest, transparent discussion about how the system works and how it can be improved. As you may know, 2 years ago, Sanofi announced our progressive and industry-leading principles. First, we made a pledge to keep price increases at or below the U.S. national health expenditure projected growth rate. Second, we committed to providing a clear rationale for pricing when we launch new medicines. And third, we have increased transparency by providing each year information about our list and net prices across all of our medicines. In 2018, the average aggregate list price increase across all Sanofi medicines in the US was 4.6%, while the average aggregate net price, that is the price actually paid to Sanofi, declined by 8%. The declining average aggregate net price in 2018 represents the third consecutive year in which the amount paid by payers across all of our medicines went down. I feel a special obligation to address the pressing issues around access and affordability of our insulins. Insulin is a clear example of the growing gap between list and net prices. Since 2012, the net price of Sanofi insulins has declined 25%, yet patient out-of-pocket costs have continued to rise. If you take Lantus, for instance, our most prescribed insulin, the net price has fallen by 30% since 2012. Yet, over the same period, average out-of-pocket costs have risen approximately 60% for patients with commercial insurance and Medicare. It is my belief that declining net prices should result in lower out-of-pocket costs for patients. But clearly, this is not always the case. Addressing list prices alone will not be sufficient to solve the problem of patients' out-of-pocket costs. As we look for solutions, we must have protections for patients and link responsible pricing to both access and affordability. Every actor in the system has a role to play, and Sanofi takes this call to action seriously. There are different ways to accomplish these goals, and Sanofi could support options that align to our core principles. First, changes to the drug pricing and reimbursement system must be holistic, factoring in all actors in the system, and the majority of benefits should accrue to patients. And second, to maintain a strong environment for innovation in the United States, the government should not directly control the price of medicines, either through federal government price controls or worse, outsourcing price decisions to other countries. To ensure that responsible pricing translates to better access and affordability for patients, Sanofi supports the policy solutions outlined in my written testimony, including several policies introduced by members of this committee, such as the CREATE Act, the See-Through Act, and the SPIKE Act. So thank you for the invitation to speak with you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
I thank all of you for your testimony, and I think I heard from each of you that you're willing to work with us and people in the administration to find solutions to these problems. I welcome that sort of cooperation, and just implore you that that cooperation will have to go on weeks beyond this hearing, because we would not expect to get all the information we need just at this hearing. Now we will go to questioning. Don't start my clock yet. I haven't asked my questions yet. Before I ask questions, if I could have, obviously we got a very important meeting here. We got 7 witnesses. We got 24, 25 members of this committee. I think I'm fairly liberal in what people ask questions, but I want to repeat something I've said before, as I tend to handle all of my hearings, and that is that if you will take your 5 minutes, and if there's a few seconds left, you ask a question, then you, hopefully it's a short question at that point, and hopefully there's a short answer at that point. All that irritates me about that process is when somebody thinks they can have back and forth for 3 or 4 minutes after you ask your last question. So I'm asking you if you'd please be tolerant towards people who abide by the 5 minutes, to be respectful of that, so that everybody gets a chance to ask questions. Now my 5 minutes starts. I want to thank those of you who are here who said you would be supportive of legislation that I have been backing for a long period of time, CREATES, which is sponsored by Senator Klobuchar and, Senator Leahy and this senator, Pay for Delay by Senator Klobuchar and this senator. So those are bipartisan bills. One other bipartisan bill that you probably don't know about yet, but it's introduced by Senator Wyden and me a couple weeks ago, called the Right Rebate Act, which would close a loophole that was exploited by Mylan in the EpiPen case. So leading to my questions, starting off where Ranking Member Wyden and I have been working before I became chairman of this committee again, we investigated a lot about Gilead's pricing decisions for hepatitis C drugs. During that investigation, we acquired a document that listed some factors that Gilead considered when it priced those drugs. Those factors included the risk of quote-unquote public outcry, or the likelihood of a letter from Congress, or the likelihood of a congressional hearing. So taking off from that point, and very simple questions to answer, I think, so I want a yes or no from each of you. When your company prices its drugs, do you consider the risk of negative public opinion in the pricing of that drug? We'll start with Envy. Can you answer yes or no?
Yes, we do.
Yes, you do. Okay. What about AstraZeneca?
Yes, we do, Senator, amongst other factors, of course, but we do.
Okay. What about Bristol Myers?
Yes, we do, Senator, among many factors.
Okay. Johnson & Johnson?
Yes, we do, Senator, as well as affordable access to the medicines for the patients.
Okay. What about Merck?
Yes, we do, among other factors.
Okay. And what about Pfizer?
Yes, we do, among other factors.
And what about Sanofi?
Yes, we do, among other factors.
Okay, thank you. Another yes or no question. When determining list price, do you consider the likelihood of a congressional inquiry? Start with Abbey.
No, we did not.
What about AstraZeneca?
No, we did not, Senator.
What about Bristol Myers?
No, Senator, we have not.
And what about Johnson & Johnson?
No, Senator, we do not.
Okay, and Merck?
Not explicitly. I would say we do care what the public thinks.
Okay, and what about Pfizer?
Yeah, we do not think.
Okay, what about Sanofi?
Same, Senator, and we do not.
Okay, then I would have another yes or no question. When your company prices its drugs, do you take into account the fact that a key player is the federal government? Let's start with AbbVie.
We evaluate all the channels when we make determinations on price and affordability.
Okay, so that obviously would include the federal government.
Correct.
Yes,
AstraZeneca.
we do the same approach, Senator, and of course the federal government is a very key aspect of our deliberations.
Okay, Bristol Myers.
Yes, Senator, because the federal government is a large part of our.
Okay, Johnson & Johnson.
Yes, we take into account the value to patients, the healthcare system, and society, and the government is a key part.
Okay, and Merck.
Yes.
Okay, and Pfizer.
Absolutely.
And Sanofi.
Yes.
Okay, my last question, yes or no? Some of you have voiced support for the recent rebate rule proposed by the administration. Should the administration finalize this rule, will you commit to lowering your drug prices? Mr.
Chairman, we are supportive of the rule. We'd like to see it in its final form, obviously, to make a final decision, but we are supportive of taking the discount to the patient at the point of sale.
Okay, AstraZeneca.
The same for us, Senator. I would go one step further. If the rebates were removed from the commercial sector as well, we would definitely reduce our list prices.
Okay, and Bristol?
We have the same positions.
Okay, and Johnson & Johnson?
Yes, we're supportive, and that definitely would be my goal. We would just need to see in the final legislation, it's provided that there aren't additional fees that are added into the system to compensate for the rebates.
Okay, Merck.
I would expect that our prices would go down if we change the system, again, on the commercial side as well as the Medicare side.
Okay, Pfizer.
It is very clear intention that we will not keep a single dollar from these rebates. We will try to move every single penny to the patients. And we think if this goes also to the commercial plans, that will be even better for more patients.
Okay. Sanofi.
Lowering list price has to be linked to better access and affordability at the counter for the patients.
Okay. I want my fellow colleagues to know that I stopped at 5 minutes and 26 seconds. Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start, if I could, with you, Mr. Borla, on this list price question. And I want to see if we can do a couple of yes or no questions. Is it correct that your company and nobody else sets the starting price for all drugs sold by Pfizer? It's a yes or no.
It is a negotiation with PBMs, and they are very powerful.
But you still get to set the list price.
Yes, but we set the list price and the rebate levels
Is it correct when a hypothetical patient, let's call her Mrs. Jones, goes to pay for her drug at the pharmacy counter, her coinsurance is based on the price of the drug you set?
It is correct in many cases.
Okay. I just want you all to know that the #1 reason consumers are getting hammered is because these list prices, which you have the last word with respect to where they are unaffordable. And the high prices are tied to what the consumer pays at the pharmacy counter. And all this other stuff you talk about, the rebates and the discounts and the coupons, all this other stuff is window dressing, all of it. And the fact is, on Part D, 40% of the drugs don't even have a rebate. So I want it understood, particularly because I've asked you, Mr. Borla, I think you and others in the industry are stonewalling on the key issue, which is actually lowering list prices. And reducing those list prices are the easiest way for American consumers to pay less at the pharmacy counter. Now, Mr. Gonzalez, I want to ask you some questions relating to the international pricing situation. Drug prices are much higher in the United States than in other developed countries, on average 40% higher. In 2017, AbbVie made $9.9 billion in revenue outside the United States. So my first question to you is, do you make a profit on the drugs that you sell in Germany or in France?
Yes, we do.
So if you do, and you have said that that's the case, if you can turn a profit in a country with dramatically lower prices, you can do the same thing in the United States. How is that not gouging the American consumer with high prices, even though you're giving other people in Western industrialized countries a better deal?
Senator, it's a great question. And the reality is, and I don't think it's just unique to AbbVie, is that prices vary dramatically around the world. There is no question, at least in AbbVie's business for the most part, the U.S. has some of the highest prices in the world. That's not universally true. The government has some relatively low prices in comparison. But I think the fundamental issue is this. Our system is built around a variety of pricing around the world, but that overall system supports our R&D model. If a market at the size of the United States were to collapse to the lower end of that pricing model, then I can just tell you AbbVie would not be able to invest the level of R&D that it invests today. So that's the reality.
Well, I think time's short. As I noted in my opening statement, global R&D spending is far less than the revenue you make in America. American patients bring in more than enough revenue to cover your R&D costs. I mean, I'm going to have town meetings in a few days at home, and people will say, Ron, this is ridiculous that we are getting gouged when people around the world are getting a better deal. And what you have told me today is, A, they are getting a better deal and you can make profit. B, it is somehow tied to research and development, and the fact is that research and development is less than the revenue that you're making in this country, and that's why people are so angry. And I'd also like to note that a Humira biosimilar was launched in Europe last year, and due to AbbVie's anti-competitive behavior in the United States, that same biosimilar will not be available here until 2023. You got a double standard. You're willing to sit by and hose the American consumer and give the breaks to people overseas. So I'm going to wrap up and stick to the chair's time limit by asking you in writing so that we can better understand the situation for the drugs you sell in other countries. I would like to know whether the drugs you sell in other Western industrialized countries, just the Western industrialized countries, does your company make or lose money? Can you get that to me in writing within 10 days?
I can give it to you right now.
Okay.
We make money in any country that we sell in, unless we choose to donate the product into those countries, and we do that in certain countries that can't afford it, but not the Western.
I would like it in writing.
Okay. One thing I would like to point out that I don't think is totally accurate, that you described, at least for AbbVie, is we spend $5.2 billion in R&D. We make $5.6 billion in earnings. So our R&D is almost equivalent to what our earnings are.
Well,
I'm going to,
okay. We'll continue that.
I'm going to list the 4 names at a time. Roberts would be next, and then Stabenow, and then Enzi, and then Cantwell. So if you are irritated about how you might be on this list, take it out with one of your colleagues on the committee, because I'm reading it just the way the staff gave it to me. So, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be timely. This whole situation reminds me of when Mark Twain, i.e. Samuel Clemens, went to Missouri. That was his first mistake, and made some remarks to a small town. The mayor afterwards said, well, now we have the tar and the feathers and a rail. We'd like to ride you out of town on a rail. He said, if it wasn't for the honor of it, I'd just as soon not do that. And I think in some ways that's where you are sitting right now. I worry about the cost. I worry about the access. I worry about the value. I worry about the fact that when I did just last night, all of a sudden found out that the prescription I had cost twice as much. I still haven't quite figured that out. I don't know which one of you to blame. But at any rate, I worry about H2S. I worry about CMS. I worry about the federal government taking over with regards to the decisions that you make. I also worry about what the distinguished senator from Oregon described as a terrified public, and certainly we don't want any liars. I want to ask you one simple question. Staff has arranged about 7 good questions. I'll submit them for the record. Under the banner of certainty and predictability, what keeps you up at night? In other words, if in fact we invited you back and you could come back, or let me put it another way, what would happen if you ran into some things that were unprecedented and you wouldn't be here? We wouldn't have the Magnificent Seven if in fact that's what we want to dub you. What I want to know is what is the thing that keeps you up at night so you can be a viable company now and down the road to achieve what we all want in terms of access and cost. And I'm going to start with Mr. Brandecourt because I want to go from right to left for a change.
Thank you, Senator. What keeps me up at night?
Could you speak up, please?
Sure. I think I'm on. It's to ensure that I have a pipeline of new products which is innovative enough to alleviate, some of the disease burdens in the countries where we are. So it's all making our company meaningful in delivering what we're supposed to do the best.
Thank you.
Mr. Senator, the reason we exist is to bring breakthroughs that change patients' lives, and this is what keeps me up. And this is the reason why our employees come to work. This is the reason why our investors invest on us. If our pipeline will not deliver on the promise, and this is very challenging because we are dealing with very difficult diseases to crack, then we will not be able to fulfill our promise to society and will not be able to fulfill our promise to investors.
Mr. Fraser, thank you for your 5-point plan. What say you?
I would say, Senator, the thing that keeps me most up at night is the concern that we will not have a viable, predictable market that will allow people to continue to put the very large amounts of money up at risk for a long period of time in an attempt to find solutions to some of the hardest problems like Alzheimer's that have evaded solutions. And what really concerns me is when we don't treat these issues as a systemic issue and the public thinks that they have to have outrageous solutions to the problem where in the future we won't get these drugs. So I would hope that we could talk about these things systemically and try to come up with the kinds of solutions that will in fact make patients have access to medicines today while allowing tomorrow's breakthroughs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Talbert.
Senator, the easy diseases have been largely solved.
Could you speak up as well? I'm sorry.
Sure. Sorry about that. Senator, the easy diseases have largely been solved. It gets harder and harder as we go after new treatments and new cures for ever more challenging diseases. So from our perspective, what keeps me up at night is that investment in innovation and the ability to continue to invest to be able to go after the cures and the diseases that we really want to solve.
Thank you, Mr. Cafario. Pardon me.
Mr. Senator, I am a physician, as I said earlier. What keeps me up at night is our patients that still don't have an opportunity for their cancer to be treated. And as a result of that, I'm really focused on first continuing to invest in R&D together with the 7,000 scientists at Bristol Myers Squibb, and also make sure that every patient that needs one of our medicines has access to them.
Mr. Sorio.
Senator, the two things, actually. One is making sure we have the best science, the best scientists, and an environment that stimulates their innovation. The second is really to come up with ways to demonstrate the value of our products. I believe that medicines are actually part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's sad that we are talking about those difficulties patients are facing. In the last 15 years, the mortality for cardiovascular disease has declined by 35%. Most of this is due to good treatments for hypertension, cholesterol, and in fact, it's cost-effective. We keep patients out of the hospital. So the one thing that really keeps me up at night is how do we demonstrate the value we bring and how do we reduce overall healthcare costs?
Mr. Gonzalez, I'm out of time.
No, he can answer. You ask your question. Go ahead.
Thank you for being so liberal.
Thank you, Senator. There are two things that keep me up at night. The first is, we, like many around this table, are working on some of the toughest diseases that are out there, which take on tremendous amounts of risk. I'm sure you've heard that many, many times. But the reality is, when we work on these diseases, like Alzheimer's as an example, when someone comes up with a beneficial treatment for Alzheimer's, it's going to change the lives of patients, families, and it's going to reduce dramatically healthcare costs, but not necessarily the cost of medicine. The cost of medicine is going to go up. The cost of nursing homes are going to go down. And systems have a very difficult time trying to measure that benefit. But the reality is, when you're working in these areas with these kind of innovative diseases, that is the ultimate payback that the system has to be able to evaluate.
Senator Stabenow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you for being here. I'll tell you what keeps people in Michigan up late at night. It's the cost of life-saving medicine for themselves, their children, their parents, and so that's why it's important that we're here. And I'm glad we're talking about research, because I'd like to step back a moment and talk about who basically is funding research, and I hope you will say thank you to the American taxpayer, because American families fund the National Institute of Health. A recent report found that NIH funding research contributed to every single one of the 210 new drugs approved by the FDA from 2010 to 2016, and that American taxpayers contributed more than $200 billion in grants, $200 billion in grants to your companies and others, grants, not loans, grants to developing these drugs. That's about 200,000 years of accumulated research. And I support that because the basic research is something that I believe we all need to share in. At the same time, when you then go from there and are doing R&D, you can write that off your taxes so American taxpayers subsidize you again. Now, according to the most recent SEC filings, the 7 companies, all of you here today, have spent about $80 billion on selling, marketing, and administrative expenses last year, which was $22 billion more than you spent on R&D. So let's just be clear on this. And American taxpayers, we are happy to help you be able to develop these drugs, but I can tell you the people in Michigan just feel that the bargain ought to be that they ought to be able to afford the medicine after they have helped to develop it. Between 2006 and 2015, the largest 25 drug companies enjoyed an average annual profit of between 15% and 20%. Most other large Fortune 500 companies saw between 4% and 9%. I know the auto industry would love to get the kind of profits that you have, but the reality is that if people don't buy a car, they don't buy furniture, their life is not threatened. If they can't buy your product, it may be. So that's why this is so important today. And Mr. Gonzalez, I want to specifically start with you because Humira is the world's best-selling drug. It treats arthritis, Crohn's disease, as we know, ulcerative colitis. And you introduced the drug in 2003. In 2017, it generated $18.4 billion in revenue, And if Humira was its own company, it would be among the Fortune 500 companies all by itself. So let's talk about this, because the average person on Medicare is earning $26,000 a year. The price of your drug started high and has gone higher to a point now where it is as much as $50,000 a year. So, Mr. Gonzalez, your primary patent expired in the U.S. in 2016. Is that correct? And you have more than 100 other kinds of patents for processes and techniques and so on. And in fact, according to a report, Broad U.S. Humira Patent Estate, some of the patents go up to 2034, which gives you about 31 years of patent protection. That's a pretty good deal on this successful drug. When we look at what is happening around, well, let me first ask this. Has the drug itself gotten any better with all the new patents?
I think as you look at the evolution of the patent portfolio that is around Humira, it's important to keep in perspective that that patent portfolio evolved as we discovered and learned new things about Humira. In particular, as we discovered that this particular molecule could be utilized across a large number of different disease states.
And I'm going to, unfortunately, in the interest of time, I appreciate that and would want to follow up in writing, but as I understand it, the chemical formula is the same, and so it's a question of how we use the patent system. But to look at, in Europe, when your patents expired in the fall of 2018 and 2 biosimilars came on the market, your prices there were already lower than in the U.S., but now you're offering, I understand, up to 80% discounts to be able to continue to compete in Europe. Why don't you, with all of the support from American taxpayers on this drug, why don't you offer the same low price to American families?
Because Humira plays a very important role in AbbVie's overall funding of R&D. And I think it's fundamentally underpinned by the fact that if you look at these inventions that we've created that are patented, as I said, they included a number of different diseases for which Humira was effective, and they evolved over time. We think we have struck a reasonable balance. We have now licensed 7 biosimilar players to the entire portfolio, so they can use that portfolio to go out and copy Humira. We've given licenses to them that they'll all enter the market in 2023. The earliest patent to expire in that portfolio is June of 2022. So literally, 7 biosimilars will come in within a year.
Mr. Gonzalez, I know my time is up. Let me just say, I think that you charge more here because you can. And American taxpayers are subsidizing all of you to be able to have incredibly high profits, the fastest growing part of the healthcare system. And I think the people in Michigan and across the country deserve better. They need to be able to afford the medicine and not have to go to another country to get it.
Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr.
Because Senator Enzi, if he comes back, we'll call on him.
That's the way it goes, huh?
You go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to get feedback on the market-type mechanisms and whether they would drive down costs to purchasers and to consumers. So concepts like allowing states to negotiate on behalf of a population for healthcare plans, like the basic health plan in New York. Does that drive down costs? No one wants to take that on?
Thank you, Senator. I didn't know who the question was addressed to. I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that there is no single market for drugs in this country. So, for example, we're on limited time, and I appreciate the chairman's great efforts. No, I'm just trying to get yes and no answers, whether these concepts drive, whether you believe they do. If it's a hard question to answer, it just tells me something about how willing you are going to be to help us with this problem. So my point is this: states negotiating on drug prices on behalf of a group of citizens, does it drive down price for consumers, in your opinion, yes or no? I would have to say, depending on the system, it could very well do that, but I think it will do that at the expense of a system, for example, in our Medicare system that has come in at 50% of what it was projected to be. I want to come back to an issue that was raised at the beginning about the affordability, and if you'll just allow me. A significant issue in our system is that patients pay 13% against the list price for drugs when they pay 3% against a lower negotiated price for other medical services. I think the primary issue in our country now is out-of-pocket costs. 13% is much higher than 3%. And if we were designing a system, we would never design a system that actually taxes the sicker people to pay for the healthy people. Okay, I'm asking a really basic question. Like the VA's ability to negotiate on drug prices, do you think that states having that same ability drives down price? I would say that the VA would get a lower price and the states would get a lower price if you're willing to go into an environment where that could be imposed by states. Well, or the federal government. But in one example, which I think you are familiar with because I do think you're involved with hepatitis C drugs, Washington's Medicaid program is continuing to think about a Netflix model where you buy the best, the lowest per unit cost and cover more people. Do you think that model works in driving down costs to consumers? I think that could work to drive down costs to consumers, no question. As long as you have the state, quote, negotiating, I would object to the word very frequently. When we deal with governments outside the United States, people use the word negotiations. Those prices are imposed. Well, someone who is negotiating on behalf of the patients they're trying to cover negotiates with you or other drug companies on whether they're going to meet that discount. They're using market force of bundling up and leverage. I call it a Costco model. If you buy in bulk, you get a discount. We're clearly doing it with the VA. The question debated here is whether we should spread that out to cover more federal programs, which is what is being done in Canada, and whether we should use those same market forces in allowing states to negotiate, at least for the working poor in this country, a better deal than they can get because they work, for employers that don't cover them.
So I think if you guys can't even agree that these basic market functions that allow people to buy in bulk and get a discount are good ideas for consumers, then I don't think you're going to come up with anything we're going to agree on here. Because these are market functions, basic market functions. Anybody else want to add whether they believe in these market functions?
Yeah, Senator, I would just illustrate one point. I think your point is a valid one for the overall system cost. But I think what Mr. Frazier was describing is a critical issue. There's two affordability issues here. There's the affordability to the system, and there's the affordability to the patient. And what both have challenges, but the affordability to patients now has really gotten out of hand. I'll give you an example, my HCV example. We cut the price by 72%, the list price by 72%. The out-of-pocket costs in Medicare is $3,250. The same patient that couldn't afford the out-of-pocket cost at $7,000, unfortunately, can't afford $3,250.
Well, I will tell you what is absurd is the fact that you got a $6.3 billion tax break in the last tax bill, and you can't even say that you're for basic market functions like giving people discounts when they're bundled and you get volume. So I guess we'll have a tough time coming to something, but I know people here are going to want basic market functions to drive down costs for consumers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Corner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gonzalez, I want to focus on Humira. Obviously, it generates about $18 billion of revenue for your company each year. Is that right?
That is correct.
Please understand, I get it. We want to make sure that we maintain the most innovative pharmaceutical drug companies in the world because we want to provide life-saving cures for our people. And I get the idea that that's the purpose of the patent system, which is to protect the exclusivity of that drug that you've sunk a lot of money into the research and development for. And I support our patent system. I think it's very important. But what I don't understand is, according to my information here, Humira has 247 patents. And some of those patents don't expire until 2034. And as Senator Stabenow pointed out, Humira first was sold to patients in 2003. So is it your company's position that it should have an exclusive monopoly on that medication for 31 years?
Senator, no, it's not. It's essentially the patents cover innovations that we created, and I think one of the things that's been lost here is it doesn't matter how many patents you have, and those are applications that you described, not actual patents, but there is a large portfolio of patents. It has 136 patents.
So you have 247 patent applications, but you have 61 patents? How many patents
I'm
do you have?
sorry, 136 patents.
136 patents on one drug.
But, well, remember, Humira is like 9 different drugs or 10 different drugs. So
I thought you said to Senator Stabenow it was the same molecule.
It is the same molecule, but it treats different conditions, and if you look at that patent portfolio.
So you use the same molecule to treat different conditions. You can get a patent on that treatment?
Certainly. You know, as an example, one of the areas that got a significant number of patents was inflammatory bowel disease. After we developed RA, we realized that Humira might work in that area. That was an area that was undertreated. Most drugs had failed. We did 20 clinical trials to determine how to make Humira work in those patients, and we were issued a large number of patents for the discovery work that we did in that area. But in the end, the number of patents is not something that protects a product. If a competitor wants to make a generic version of a product, there are patents everywhere. The question is, does the invention stop the biosimilar player from making the product? If the invention doesn't, the patent is meaningless. If the invention, then
the patent gives you an exclusive right to produce a drug.
No, we don't block any biosimilars. Biosimilars can make the product.
No, maybe you misunderstood. A patent during its term gives you exclusive rights to produce the drug, correct?
No.
No.
The composition of matter patent would give you exclusive rights to produce the drug, but the patents that are covered in this portfolio are for individual innovations that were created. And in many cases, when we go into an area, there are always patents. The first thing you do is you look to see, can I design around those patents? If ultimately you determine you can't design around those patents, then you go to the player who has the patent and you negotiate a license. And we have now given license to virtually every single biosimilar player with the exception of one. And we've done it literally 10 years before the last patent expires in that portfolio. So we've tried to strike what we think is a reasonable balance. I realize it may not be popular, but I think it is a reasonable balance.
Well, what I'm concerned about is, as I've told you at the outset, I support drug companies recovering a profit based on their R&D and their development of innovative drugs. But at some point, that patent has to end, that exclusivity has to end so that the patients get access to those drugs at a much cheaper cost. It's true that your company blocked Amgen for a number of years from seeking to produce a Humira biosimilar or equivalent, correct?
Amgen has a license in the United States right now to be able to produce.
But you blocked them for 5 years, right?
No, we didn't block them.
You sued them.
They came to us and they wanted access to the portfolio that we had, and we licensed them.
Did you sue them?
We did, yes.
And you entered into an agreement with them that accommodated both your needs and their needs, I assume.
We licensed them a patent portfolio. They pay us a royalty on the patent portfolio when they come to market, and that's essentially it, just like any other license.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to interrupt. Senator Cornyn's dead right, and that's exactly the same point I was going to make.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, can I just make a suggestion that I know this topic is the subject of, or within the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee, but those of us like you and me who are also on the Judiciary Committee that has jurisdiction over the patent system, I think this is an area that we need to look in through our Judiciary Committee authorities as well.
Why don't you take that up with Graham, and I will make sure that I back you up on it.
I'll look forward to your backup.
And let me know what your conversation produced.
Thank you.
Yeah. The next four would be Menendez, Thune, Carpenter, and Isaacson. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say a few words before asking some questions. To the New Jersey companies here today, thank you for coming. I'm proud our state is at the forefront of innovation. But even in New Jersey, where the pharmaceutical industry and related fields like medical research employ hundreds of thousands of people, the overwhelming majority of the more than 9 million New Jerseyans believe drug prices are too high. And so I think we all have to be responsive to that challenge collectively. Americans everywhere reject the notion that reducing prescription drug costs means reducing innovation. They're uniting around this issue. And it isn't a Democratic or Republican priority. It's bipartisan. Maybe it's for political reasons, but President Trump is talking more and more about executive action. A Republican chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Grassley, has convened this hearing today, the second of 2 on prescription drugs. And reducing prescription drug prices has become a focal point of virtually every Democratic presidential campaign. So consider it a friendly warning from someone who believes in the hope that you provide patients in the need of new cures and treatments. It's time to be proactive, because if you do not make a meaningful action to reduce prescription drug prices, policymakers are inevitably going to do it for you. So I just hope you'll take that to heart. Let me ask you, many corporations, not just pharmaceutical ones, received a huge windfall from the Trump tax bill. Your company spent well over $40 billion buying back your own stock in the past year. Going down the row, can you just give me the ballpark number? Did any of you use your tax breaks to lower the costs of any of your prescription drugs?
We did not use our tax break to lower the cost of prescription drugs. We used it for other aspects of trying to stimulate the economy and invest further in the United States.
No, you didn't use lower the cost, yeah.
Senator, the tax break for us being based in the UK had a very marginal impact on our profitability. So I think the question is,
The question is a simple yes or no. For whatever you use your tax breaks, whatever the tax break was, did you use it to, any part of it, to lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, the cost of our prescription drugs on a net basis has been declining for many years now. Senator Wyden took...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm sorry. It's a simple question. Did you use any part of the tax break that you got to lowering the cost of your prescription drugs?
In a roundabout way, yes, we did, because the minimal tax benefit we got helped us sustain our profitability at the same time as our prices were declining.
Dr. Caffeine?
We didn't.
Hello, Senator. It provided us the opportunity to invest an incremental $30 billion in R&D and capital investments in the U.S. over the next 4 years. We think that that's the best way for us to be able to deliver for patients.
Mr. Fraser.
Senator, our effective tax rate went up from 19.1 to 19.8.
We did use this tax break to do many things, among them reduce our prices. Prices in 2018, for the first time since I remember, went down in Pfizer.
As a French company headquarters in Paris, we didn't get much from the tax break. On the GATT basis, we lower our global tax rate by 1.5%.
All right. Now, in November 2017, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb called on pharmaceutical companies to, quote, end the shenanigans when it comes to the ability of potential competitors to purchase branded doses at full market price. He stated, and I quote, I see this clearly, for example, in steps branded companies sometimes take to make it hard, altogether impossible, for generic firms to get access to the doses of the branded companies needed in order to compete bioequivalent studies that the FDA requires for a generic approval. I've co-sponsored legislation called CREATES that ends the gamesmanship by certain companies where they prevent generic manufacturers from assessing the necessary samples they need to develop generics. Last year, the FDA published its first list of medicines that generic companies have had trouble accessing. That list includes more than 170 complaints covering 50 medicines. So can you go down the line and tell me, yes or no, does your company in any way restrict access to or block the purchase of samples at full market price?
No, we do not.
No, we do not.
We do not. We support the current version of the CREATES Act.
No, we do not.
No, we do not.
No, we do not, and we support CREATES.
No, we do not, and we support CREATES too.
I have other questions. I'm going to submit them for the record. Thank you, Mr.
Senator. Thank you. Senator Carper.
Thanks to each of you for joining us today. My wife lost her mother when she was 11 years old. My wife said, put a hole in her heart. She's never gotten over it. My own mother, her mother, and her grandmother, by the time they were 80, they did not know who they were or where they were or who we were. For all of us, this is personal, and it's political, and it's economic. When we have a hearing of this nature, one of the things I like to do with disparate witnesses like these, you're all from the same industry, but you have different views, come from different parts of the world. But I'm going to, in a minute, give you, what I'm looking for is consensus. What I think we're looking for is consensus, agreement on what is the right thing to do to make sure that what you're producing is effective and affordable for us, for the government, for our constituents. I'm going to give you 3 items and ask you to tell us what you think. If we do nothing else, those 3 items, we can all agree on those, okay? And I'll give you those in I'll give them to you right now. The first is eliminating rebates to PBMs. That's the first one, eliminating rebates to PBMs. The second is value-based arrangements. And the third is increasing transparency industry-wide on how you set your prices. Increasing transparency industry-wide on how you set your prices. And if you would like to take a moment, and we'll just start with you, Mr. Gonzalez. We'll just start with this question first and see if we have time to get it done. I hope so we do. Those 3.
I would say that we clearly support providing the discount at the patient level, so eliminating rebates essentially. We absolutely support value-based pricing because that is the business we're in and the kinds of diseases we're trying to treat and cure. And we absolutely support transparency. and I would say transparency even more broadly across the entire system, including everyone that's in the supply chain, and that would also include where government rebates are, such as the 340B program. We would support total transparency across that.
Thank you. I'd ask each of our other witnesses to also keep your responses short. Monsieur Sorel.
Senator, I would give the same responses. We support all three items. I would go one step beyond, which is if the rebates, as I said earlier, were to be removed from Part D and the commercial sector, we would actually reduce our list prices by the rebates amount, less the fees that are probably single-digit type fees to be paid to wholesalers and other stakeholders in the system. Since you talked about you know, a disease that is very common and becoming more common and a tragedy for people who suffer from it, Senator, I'd just like to say that, as Mr. Frazier said a bit earlier, his company spent $1 billion on developing a drug for Alzheimer's. Our company, together with Lilly, we spent $900 million to try and develop an Alzheimer's drug that failed. And that's a really good reminder of the risks that we take as an industry. We spent $900 million, many years of work, and at the end of the day, nothing.
Good, thank you. Dr. Cofferell.
Yes, Senator. First of all, I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask you to be very brief in your research.
I
Right
would
to
be
the
very
point.
brief. I would say that not only do we support all three elements that you mentioned, but I do believe those three elements, together with the continued effort to develop a generic and biosimilar market, would mean significant change and would clearly alleviate the concerns that patients have today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Oberg.
Hi, Senator. First of all, I'm very sorry for your wife's family and also for your family. It
Well, it's all of us. Everybody in this room could probably point to similar experience. All of us do.
Absolutely. We are very supportive of all three elements that you outlined. So the elimination of...
That's good. That's all I need.
Perfect.
Thank you. Mr. Frazier.
We too support all three.
Thank you.
Senator, all three elements are transformational for our industry. Will disrupt it. However, we do agree that these are the three things that needs to be done, and also I believe that we'll have significant, meaningful results if we do them.
Thank you, sir.
We strongly support the three, Senator, but we want to keep in mind at the end of the chain, the patient has to benefit. So if rebates are removed, it has to be to the benefit of patients.
Good, thanks. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to do a follow-up question in writing about asking your responses, your reactions to what's going on in Germany on this front. What do you like about it? What concerns you might have about it? That's a different question, but it relates to this discussion. Thank you.
Before Senator Thune goes, can I ask Dr. Cofferio, did you say you support the CREATES Act as well?
I did, Senator Chairman.
Thank you. As sponsor of that, I appreciate that very much.
Thanks for your work in that area.
Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert for the record a one-page document from 340B Health that shows that manufacturer discounts account for less than 2% of the total drug market.
Without objection, sword.
Each of you have referenced the recently proposed rebate rule, which outlines several different scenarios of how drug companies and others would react, as well as the impact on Part D premiums. Mr. Frazier and Dr. Borla, if the rule were finalized, could you please discuss how you would set list price and how your negotiations would work with others in the supply chain?
Okay, assuming that, as I said when I answered the question before, assuming that we do change the systems on the commercial side and the Medicare side so that no one company faces a disadvantage, we would be lowering list prices. We've been asked to lower list prices. We have lowered list prices in the past and found that it creates a financial disadvantage for the company, and it doesn't get us more volume because of the incentives in the system. So if we change all the incentives at one time, then list prices can come down.
Dr. Borla?
50% of the American people are in commercial plans, and these rebate rules apply to Medicare. If the rules apply to all, it's definitely the list price will go down. But also, during the Medicare-only application, we pledge and we commit that every single dollar will go to the patients. As the chairman said, the list price is not irrelevant. It's very relevant for a lot of people because they have to pay list price during the deductible period. However, if the rebate rule is applied, then they become irrelevant because the patients will not be paying the list price at the purchase point. And this is a significant win. What I want to say is that even if we don't move it to commercial, that I overwhelmingly support, I think it's a significant win for the American people if we do it even in Medicare only.
So Medicare only would be an improvement, but you pointed out in your testimony that the challenges associated with the bifurcated market with respect to rebate reform. So how would manufacturers respond if the rebate rule were finalized for government programs? I mean, what does that mean for the commercial market?
Senator, as I said before, all these proposals that we are discussing, even they remain eliminating the rebate rule, are transformational and will disrupt the way we do business. I don't know exactly how the system will evolve, and I really don't favor a bifurcated system. I would like to have a transparent single system across both parts. So we need to see how the whole thing will evolve.
Okay. You've each expressed support, and this was alluded to earlier by Senator Carper, for paying for value as well as the value your medicines bring to the healthcare system. I'm a believer in value-based insurance design as a way to lower the overall healthcare costs, and I've worked on legislation to advance this principle. As we drive toward paying for value, how do we make sure that you as drug manufacturers still have the incentives to keep your prices low and that we're not just shifting money around in the system?
I think by definition a value-based arrangement will align the incentives, not only us, but also the insurance companies, around one common goal: the good for the patient, clinical outcomes, measurable clinical outcomes for the patient and the healthcare system. In this case, if we fail to produce drugs through our research efforts that will have meaningful clinical benefits for the patients, yes, we will not be paid. And this system also will help that medicines that they do not add value will be paid much, much less, so that can create space for medicines that they do create value. Okay. It's the best way of aligning the incentives of everyone around the interest of the patients.
Anybody else want to react to that?
Yes, Senator, if you allow me, we have an example that I quoted before. We have a product that is used for the treatment of patients who have experienced a heart attack. If you experience a heart attack, when you're discharged from the hospital, your chance of getting a second heart attack is pretty high. So we contracted with an organization and committed to reducing the percentage of patients who've had a heart attack. In return, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, for these Medicare patients, committed to ask these patients to pay a very low copay to make sure they were compliant to their treatment. And that actually delivers value to the system because patients are kept healthy, of course, good for them, but also they don't go back to the hospital. This is how we deliver value.
Okay. Thanks.
Senator, I would just add one point. I think your point is a valid one that, look, the innovative pharmaceutical can't capture 100% of the value that it saves. It has to capture less than that. And I think the way that will evolve the best is if there's strong market competition. I remember back in HCV, if you looked at the health economic data around that drug, it would have suggested that you could justify a price well north of $100,000 per patient. And the prices were relatively close to that when there was one player in the market. Today, prices have gravitated down to about $25,000, $26,000 per patient. It is the market force that created that, the market competition of more than one player being in that market and competing on an active basis. We were obviously part of that competition that drove those prices in that direction. So I don't think it is realistic to assume that a pharmaceutical, just because it can save $150,000 as an example, that it can charge $150,000. It has to charge less than that so that the overall system can benefit from the value of that medicine. But it has to be able to charge a price that's reasonable enough to be able to achieve and continue to fund the going forward programs.
Yeah. Isaacson and then Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. This is a terrific hearing, and we're going to have a lot of hearings on this subject. I told my staff a couple weeks ago, I said, you know, I have been a solid supporter of the pharmaceutical industry all in my career, and I appreciate all that you do. I go to work every day because of carpal levodopa. I wouldn't be able to be here today if it wasn't for the pharmaceutical industry, and I have Parkinson's disease, but I can function every day and do my job because of that, and I appreciate it every day. My first chief of staff called me Sunday night from Children's Hospital in Atlanta to say his youngest son had just been diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. His first child, a daughter, had juvenile diabetes 12 years ago. But the thing he said at the end of the call is, at least I know that he can live a normal, happy life because of insulin and because of pharmaceutical care. So I'm not softening you up. I am softening you up because those are good stories that we can't forget. And that is the value of innovation and research and development, and we appreciate it. However, when you can't explain it, and you're elected to the United States Senate, and I appreciate your comment about how you're honored you are to be in the United States Senate, Mr. Borrelli, but the fact of the matter is, when I can't explain it, it's tough. And I can't explain the cost increases I've seen a lot of. Recently, one medicine I take 8 a day. One of the ones I take today went up when I went to get my new prescription in January. It was $90 more than it was at the end of last year. I just said, how can that be? And the guy said this and that and the other. He said, but let me call you back. He said, I'll call you in the next hour and see if I can't find a better price. In an hour's time, he had 4 prices for the same pharmaceutical. Some, if I didn't use insurance, it was one price. If I used cash, it was another price. If I took discounts, it was another price. If there were coupons, it was another price. And I don't remember the name of all of them, but I remember it was very complicated. And it reminded me of my business. When I sold real estate, the price of a mortgage was not just the interest rate that you paid in the sticker price, but you take the effect of discount points and rebates and other things that go into the annual percentage rate return of the product. And that's what you're doing with discounts and with rebates, I assume. And it's going into the cost of and ultimately into your product, which caused me to ask this question. Who sets the discount and who sets the rebate? Pardon my finger, but we'll start with you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Senator. I think the best way to illustrate what you're describing is to give you an example. So Humira—
A short example, please.
Okay. Humira, we raised the price in 2019 6.2%. The actual fall through to the company, the realized price in 2019 will be 0.9%. So the part in between there is rebates that have gone up and channel mix primarily. But it does give you some idea of the massive change that can occur between list and realized price. We raise price to try to offset inflation, merit increases that we give our employees, and increases in R&D.
So you set the discount or the rebate?
We negotiate with payers, so managed care.
You're a supplier, though, and so you negotiate with the pharmaceutical, the PBMs, and those people. Is that right?
Correct. And they negotiate aggressively.
Is that pretty much true with everybody, that they're the major component between the end retail consumer price and the origin of the product?
Yes, Senator.
Well, that seems like that's someplace we ought to focus, because that's where the distorted numbers come in. Johnson & Johnson, and I'm sorry, Jensen, is that right? Is that the subsidiary?
Yes, Janssen, correct.
And in your testimony, you talk about your average list price of 8.1% up, but an average net price change of only 4.6%. So while your gross went up 8.6, your net went down 4.6 in the same pricing period. How does that happen? If you're setting how does it not go up on the bottom?
Yeah, and in fact, in 2018, our net price actually declined 8.6%. So even more than that. So the intermediaries in the system are very, very effective negotiators.
Okay, tell me who the intermediaries are.
Those would be the PBMs and the insurers.
And the insurance company.
Right, and they set the formularies for patients.
And they're not the same people, they're two different people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
Okay.
Excuse
me for doing this, but I want to make sure I get all this in. And I apologize, you're a nice lady and I'm being ugly to do that, but I'm sorry.
All fine.
All right, we got the PBMs and we got the insurance companies. Yep. Is there anybody else between the wholesale price by the manufacturer at the beginning and the retail price that's sold at the end in the drugstore? Is there anybody else that contributes to the cost other than the discount and the rebate?
Several actors, Senator, in the supply chain are rewarded on the listing price, wholesalers themselves, and, you know.
Is that a consumption bonus? Is that a sales bonus? That they're rewarded for doing what?
Well, to be a wholesaler and distribute our products, what we need to do in order to realign the incentive is to get rid of the reward being based on a listing price.
I've got to stop because the chairman is mean and he'll cut me off the next time. So I'll end by saying this. You answered my question, but it does point out the one person that's not benefiting from the rebates, not benefiting from the cost negotiation is the customer. And we're here for the customer today. We represent them. And so we got to get to the bottom of this so we can have something we can explain and they can experience. And I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
I let Senator go because he was echoing my beliefs. Go ahead, Senator Carter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank all of our witnesses. I also want to say how proud I am of the results of the pharmaceutical industry and the discoveries that you made, the innovations that you brought to market, the impact you've had on quality of life and on cost, overall cost of health care by the discoveries that you have been able to advance. The challenge that we all have is that why should Americans be shouldering the lion's share of the cost and burden of research and development and bringing new drugs to market? You talk about burden sharing. You talk about the fact that there should be a fair allocation on the global market, and by the way, also within our domestic market, as we know that a lot of people are being denied access to these innovative drugs because of the pricing mechanisms within the United States. So let me try to drill down on those points. Rarely am I defending an administration policy, so let me break with my normal tradition and talk about the international pricing mechanism that the Trump administration is proposing that would set target prices or international pricing indexes over a 5-year period for Part B drugs pinned to the price in comparable industrial nations, phasing it in over a period of time, and allowing a cushion for even higher prices in the United States. So if, in fact, these drugs are already price competitive, that should not be a problem. But as I understand it, there are so many drugs that we pay, American consumers pay a lot more than consumers in other industrial nations. So why not move towards a process in which American consumers share a similar price as consumers in other industrial nations in the world, particularly on a Part B program? I think it could also be extended to Part D. The only explanation I've heard is that in some countries it's a little bit longer to get new drugs admitted. We're not talking about new drugs. We're talking about here drugs that already have an existing price mechanism. Or do you support it?
Senator, thanks for your question. I did mention this in my opening remarks, so I'm happy to elaborate further. I think it's a very important point. So we take the perspective that we should always start from patient access to medicines.
Okay. I'm going to try to drill down because I only have 2 minutes. Right. So what's wrong with a model of comparing U.S. prices to prices in other industrial nations?
So 55% of new cancer medicines that are available to American patients are not reimbursed in at least...
We're talking about where there is a market price in another country. Because if there's no target price, there's no price to compare it to. Right. So there has to be a price in another country. So we're talking about drugs that are commonly available.
I believe, Senator, many of the most recently introduced drugs are not available in all of them.
Then that wouldn't apply. If I understand it, only deals with prices where there is a target price that already exists. If it doesn't, if the drug isn't on the market, they're not going to have a target price. But if the drug is on the market, you have a target price, and as I understand it, would bring down the cost here in the United States.
I believe, Senator, it would be very important for us to be thinking about policies that continue to reward innovation. We do need your support to make sure that
so you're basically saying
rewarded in other countries.
You're basically saying we overpay on available drugs so that you can make more profit from the American consumer to underwrite R&D, which benefits the global community. That's basically, as I understand that point. To me, that's a disconnect in the pricing mechanism. I want to ask Ms. Tolbert, you're the one who mentioned the advantages of the free market in negotiations under Part D. So let me just change the equation. Suppose you were on the other side of the table. Why not allow the health secretary to combine the entire Medicare market in order to negotiate a larger market share to bring down costs for Medicare.
Yeah, so we really believe that open competition and free market is the right way to go for patients.
But isn't market share that you can offer as a person seeking the cost, a driver for bringing down costs?
So the PBMs and the insurers are extraordinarily effective negotiators, and they do negotiate now on behalf of Part D members quite aggressively. In fact, I mentioned our $21 billion.
Well, my question is, isn't it the larger the market share, the better price you're going to get?
The larger the market share, the better price. It depends on a number of factors, including the number of competitors and the companies that are bidding to try to get.
But if you control more of the market, isn't that going to bring down your price? I learned that in Economics 101.
Senator Hassan. You answer the question, and we'll go to Senator Hassan.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the last piece of that question.
You have a larger consumer base on a drug because you represent all the Medicare market. Won't the prices, aren't you in a stronger negotiating position?
I think
Yes, you are.
conceptually you could be. I would say that the PBMs and insurers are pretty darn effective right now.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Wyden for this hearing today. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today as well. A couple of observations. One is that breakthroughs aren't breakthroughs if people can't afford the medicine that produces the breakthrough. Secondly, as you have all mentioned, the importance of a viable and predictable system. It has to be a viable and predictable system for patients. And right now, it is so convoluted and so non-transparent that my constituents can't figure out what the price of their medication is going to be day to day. And despite a wonderful staff, I feel like I need a PhD in prescription drug pricing to understand how the heck this industry works. And that should not be the way we proceed in this country to get these breakthroughs to people. But I want to talk about a slightly different aspect of your industry right now. We've been talking about drug pricing, which is one part of how drug companies make money. The other part is how you maximize sales. So, Ms. Taubert, I'd like to focus on how your company maximizes sales for a particular class of drugs, opioids. Can you define for me, please, Ms. Taubert, what pseudo-addiction is?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that term.
Well, let me fill you in then. Pseudo-addiction is an unproven and dubious concept that asserts that certain patients present signs of addiction because they were prescribed insufficient doses of opioids. Those peddling this pseudo-addiction concept say that instead of providing addiction treatment when somebody shows the signs of addiction, the doctor should increase their opioid doses. Even one of the original doctors who pushed this theory now admits it was, his quote, an excuse to give patients more drugs. Ms. Taubert, Janssen promoted this made-up concept of pseudo-addiction on a website that it approved and funded that was called Let's Talk Pain. Since then, your company has repeatedly said that your actions, quote, in the marketing and promotion of our opioid pain medicines was appropriate and responsible. So, Ms. Taubert, how can you possibly claim that promoting the theory of pseudo-addiction, that doctors should prescribe more opioids to patients showing signs of addiction, was appropriate and responsible?
Senator, thank you so much for that question. You know, abuse and addiction, particularly opioid abuse and addiction, are very serious public health concerns, and we recognize the impact on the American public.
So then the question is, and again, like everybody else, I've only got a few minutes here. The question is, why are you looking back at what your company did, promoting pseudo-addiction, an unproved theory that was just used to maximize sales of a deadly drug? Why is that something that you are calling appropriate and responsible?
So I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term. What I can say is, on behalf of our company, opioids represent less than 1% of our product
All right,
sales.
let me stop you right there, because my constituents don't care about the percentage.
Yeah.
They care about the behavior to maximize sales in an industry. Do you know how many Americans died from drug overdoses in 2017?
Far too many.
70,237. In 1 year, more Americans died from drug overdoses than died fighting the entire war in Vietnam. And the vast majority of those overdose deaths, about 50,000, were from opioids. My constituents are dying. Nearly 500 people in New Hampshire died from overdoses last year, and nearly 500 the years before that. And companies like Janssen and Purdue Pharma fueled this epidemic, employing deceptive and truly unconscionable marketing tactics, despite the known risks, so you could sell more drugs to maximize your profits. And now you are refusing to take responsibility for your company's role in this crisis. So one more time, do you truly think that Janssen's opioid marketing practices were appropriate and responsible? Or will you finally take responsibility for your company's role in helping create this crisis that is killing more than 100 Americans every day?
Everything that I have seen leads me to conclusively believe that everything that we have done with our products when we promoted opioid products, which we stopped marketing a long time ago, was very appropriate and responsible. However, that being said, we do believe that we have a leadership position to take in helping with this. And so we are doing a number of things in terms of mothers and babies and physician and patient education to help and to help stop, because we recognize
again,
we all play a part in trying to help this, because we realize that
our time is done, but right now, it is hard for me to take the industry's goal here as promoting good health seriously when its behavior to maximize sales of opioids created an epidemic.
Senator Lankford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. And there are people alive in the United States and around the world right now because of your companies and the work they've done with R&D, along with the National Institute for Health. And I fully acknowledge that. And I'm grateful to the people that are researching and working right now that are not watching this hearing because their face is in a microscope, actually going through things to be able to research today and what they're doing. With that said, as all of us have acknowledged that, we're trying to figure out the issue on drug pricing, because people in my state, whether they're on insulin or whether they're on Parkinson's drugs or whether they're my own family or other people in my neighborhood, it's a very significant issue for them to try to figure out how to be able to manage this. So we've got to get to the bottom of how we manage this. All of you have mentioned the rebate issue has been a problem, and that insurance companies and PBMs are very effective negotiators. Part of the challenge of this is health insurance companies pay their PBM based on the quality of their negotiation skills, cutting a price off the list price. And so if a list price is higher and a rebate is higher, that also gives preference to them. So the difficulty is, as you raise list price and the rebate gets larger, the insurance company gives that preference, making it harder for biosimilars. Am I tracking this correctly? So the challenge that we have with this is, how do we figure out how to be able to break this down? Because we've got both insurance companies, PBMs, your companies that are creating the list prices in it, and then the biosimilars trying to be able to get into this. So, Mr. Frazier, you mentioned this in particular about biosimilars and the difficulty of trying to be able to break into the market. Why would you identify why it is hard for biosimilars to get into the market, which are inherently less expensive?
I would make two suggestions very quickly, because I know you only have a little bit of time here. One is, I think we have to educate physicians and other healthcare providers about the value of biosimilars. I think, secondly, it would be very helpful if we could relieve patients of their obligation to co-pay for the cheaper biosimilars. Those would be two specific recommendations that I would make.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. For the Part B drugs, those physicians are paid a percentage of the drug cost. So a biosimilar, when it comes into the market in the Part B world, is on its own less attractive to a physician, because a physician gets a higher percentage amount, prescribing them more expensive drug, which then feeds down to the patient and to the taxpayers, right?
That's correct.
How do we break that chain?
I think that there are many ways that we'd have to look at it. I don't have the specific suggestion here. I do think educating physicians is important here, and I think relieving patients, but we also have to look at the incentives as it relates to the ASP plus 6.
Maybe I can add.
Brother, please jump in, because you had also mentioned this in your testimony as well.
I did, Senator, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. Let me give you a statistic that I think will present the magnitude of the problem. Here in the U.S., the penetration of biosimilars is much lower than in other places, but it is disproportional to different parts of the U.S. healthcare system. For example, in open systems that the decision maker, it is a PBM, one biosimilar that we are having has a market share of 5%. in the US, in closed systems, in systems like Kaiser, for example, where they're integrated healthcare systems, where the one who decides has the whole cost of the healthcare system in its interest, we have 73%. 5%, 73% for the same product. I agree with what Mr. Fraser said, that we need to create incentives, but I would add also that we need to break this rebate trap that creates significant disincentives for providers and the healthcare system and insurance companies.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I can give you an example, Senator. The insulin market has a reputation not to be very competitive. In fact, it is. And we have biosimilars which have reached the market and have grabbed a very significant market share. We believe that when insulin would not be treated as drug, but would be considered as a biologic and be submitted to biosimilar regulation back in 2020, the biosimilar market share and penetration would be even higher.
Thank you. My state in particular is working very hard on our Medicaid side, on working on value-based pricing. I know that's something that several of you have mentioned before. It is the grand challenge of not pricing a drug based on it would be more expensive to do surgery, and so we want to be slightly under the cost of surgery. We do have to be able to break through that model. Of course, surgery will be more expensive than most of our treatments, but I think there is a benefit that we continue to experiment with. If the drug is being effective, then we have a reducing price on it, and we can get a chance to be able to work through that, as we have done in our state. So
we would support that.
Well, we'll continue to be able to work through other creative mechanisms. At the end, we can't just have the taxpayer pay more, but the consumer pay less, because that's really the consumer still paying, just it moves to another spot. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
First, thank you for innovation. As a doc, I've seen cures for hepatitis C and therapies to control HIV, other inflammatory conditions, cancers that 30 years ago when I graduated from medical school were either death sentences or were a ticket to a lifelong morbidity and complications. So I thank you for that. But I'll also say that some of my patients could not afford the medicine. And for them, it is as if the innovation never took place. And that is one concern. Secondly, another concern is I think in some cases we don't have value. Now, Ms. Talbert, you suggested that PBMs are very effective negotiators. One drug that I want to bring up is Duexis, which is a combination of over-the-counter generic ibuprofen and Pepcid. Now, if I were to take this, and this is not the cheapest I could find it, and the doses that are used for Duexis, it would cost me $200 a month. But it lists at over $2,400 to $2,600 a month. Now, that doesn't seem like very good negotiations on behalf of the PBM. And if the taxpayer is paying that money for something which over the counter is $200 a month, and we're paying $2,600 a month, it is almost as if the taxpayer has stupid written on their face, which they shouldn't. That is unfair. This is not your medicine. But I use it to make the point that right now, Medicare has a very limited ability to negotiate based on marginal value. And I think that is one of the fundamental problems in this. So that said, all things considered, since Medicare does have this very low ability, Ms. Talbert, do you think that Medicare should have the ability, if the PBM's negotiation doesn't work, that the Medicare should have the ability to negotiate based somewhat on value?
So we're very supportive of the notion of value-based contracting and results.
Now, this is a little bit different, though, because what we've been describing on value-based contracting is the cancer cured or not, is the hepatitis C cured or not? This is, my gosh, you're taking 2 generic medicines and charging 10 times that which it would cost over the counter.
Yeah, and I agree. That example doesn't make any sense.
So is it reasonable then to ask that Medicare would have the ability to make some sort of judgment based upon relative value of a therapy?
I think, you know, as we've talked about, if the PBMs are very effective in negotiating, we don't know that the government would be as effective in negotiating as the professional negotiators.
Well, we don't know. I agree with that. But on the other hand, it does, and I have limited time. I don't mean to be rude. I so apologize. But there is this kind of shining example of where the PBM is not an effective negotiator. Yes, sir, Mr. Frazier.
I think this is where Chairman Grassley's opening statements about transparency come in. I think one of the keys of transparency is it empowers patients and it empowers other payers to actually make informed choices about which of those two medicines make sense.
Now, let me ask, because someone brought up the fact that Humira is now sold at an 80% discount in Denmark, and there's a Bernstein analyst which states that AbbVie still makes a profit because marginal cost of manufacturing is only about 5% of the manufacturing. So would this same entity have the ability to look not just at value, but at comparable drugs and at that which would bring value? Because clearly biosimilars have had a much greater penetration in Europe, and the United States continues to pay top dollar for the same class of drugs. Something is fundamentally broken in our system that the Danes get an 80% discount and we are not. Yes, sir.
I think we have to look at the way in which generic penetration happens outside the biosimilars market. When a drug goes off patent within...
Well, hang on, Mr. Fraser. I'm sorry. I just got limited time, and I'm going to hold you on that, okay? I don't mean to... one of the things I've heard is that if there is some limit on that profit, it may have a negative impact upon R&D. I think that's been a message here. But, Dr. Brandecourt, France has a committee on transparency, which evaluates the relative added clinical benefit of a new drug. Price is then negotiated based upon that added benefit as well as other drugs in the market. Is it safe to say that your company has found that it still pays to innovate and to do R&D in France and to offer them access to the best cutting-edge drugs?
Yeah, as a global company, we do have R&D in France. However, I wouldn't use the French system as a benchmark of a good system.
But they nonetheless have access to these. I have limited time, I'm sorry. They do have access to these drugs.
Well, that's a very good point. Some drugs are not put on the market because you don't get to the right pricing and therefore the right...
But if on the other hand, and I'll finish with this, and I don't mean to be rude, I apologize. In the International Pricing Index, we may quibble about the details, but if the U.S. would be paying 1.3 times a market basket of developed countries, a Germany, a France, a Canada, not smaller countries, we would still be paying more than they, but it would still have some relationship to reasonableness. And right now, I'm not sure, it seems as if the Medicare, in the absence of the ability to judge value, is almost a price taker when it shouldn't be as the largest purchaser.
Senator, you would ask countries where there is no negotiation, where prices are imposed to set up your U.S. pricing, and I don't think that would be good policy.
It is imposed now, but it's imposed from the other side.
Of the people that are still here, Bennett would be next, and then White House, and then Cortez Masto. Go ahead, Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for holding this hearing. There is not a town hall in Colorado where I don't hear how expensive drugs are forcing people to choose between life-saving treatments or food and utilities. In our last hearing here, we heard from a mother whose son ate once a day in order to ration his insulin because the full cost of the monthly treatment was $1,700. I don't think anybody here understands how that could be the case, but it is the case. And there's been a lot said here today about the important research and development that's going on in this country, and I, for one, and I know others share this view, we want to keep that in the United States. Having said that, I'm trying to understand how federal spending goes into prescription drug development, distribution, treatment, and pricing, and yet Americans can't afford their medications. This is, the estimates of annual federal government spending, taxpayer spending on prescription drugs range from $320 to $480 billion a year. The fact that we can't even get a more precise number than that tells you something right off the bat, but those numbers include almost $140 billion in Medicare Part D spending never paid for, about $25 billion in Medicare Part B. Medicaid spends almost $60 billion in prescription drugs. This is what the taxpayer spends every year on prescription drugs. DOD and VA spending is about $11 billion. That number alone dwarfs the R&D budgets of some of your companies. Over 6 years, slightly different point, but over 6 years, between 2010 and 2016, more than $100 billion was spent in NIH funding toward research that contributed to drug patents. Between $1 and $2 billion is claimed annually through the orphan tax credit for drugs that treat rare diseases. Another $1 billion is annually claimed through the research and development tax credit. About $12 billion is claimed annually through the direct-to-consumer advertising tax credit. I would ask you guys if I missed anything, but I think that's a pretty complete list of what we have. Yet, notwithstanding that almost $500 billion, half a trillion dollars. By the way, Medicare, you know, to spend all that money in Medicare, we're spending $2 for every dollar we're collecting, and that delta is largely because of drug prices in the unfunded part of Medicare Part D. And here's what Coloradans have recently reported in a recent survey on high drug prices. 22% did not fill a prescription, and 20% reported cutting pills in half or skipping doses. That 74% believe drug companies are charging too much money. 91% believe the government should authorize the Attorney General to take legal action to prevent price gouging or unfair prescription drug price hikes. Over 90%. And that doesn't necessarily give you their legal judgment, but that is how keenly they are feeling the problem. And 90% believe the government should require drug companies to provide advance notice of price increases and information to justify those increases. So I would ask all of you, or anybody who would care to answer this question, how we explain to our constituents, on the one hand, that we have this massive outlay of federal funds, it's their taxpayer funds, and on the other hand, the drugs they're buying are not affordable. And I realize there are all kinds of layers to this. I accept that. You know, there's the higher copays that you guys mentioned earlier from the insurance companies. That's a huge issue too. But I think that in a world where opacity or opaqueness has been, from the public's point of view, a business model for everybody in healthcare, whether it's the federal government or drug companies or insurance companies or doctors. Nobody knows what anything actually costs. Nobody knows what anything can pay. My question, I guess, is how do we better align the incentives here so that that huge outlay of money every year comes with affordable drugs at the end of the process? Mr. Gonzalez, thank you.
Senator, I can just tell you there's probably not anybody at this table that doesn't agree not a single American should go without drugs that they need, all right? And I can tell you that's the case in AbbVie. And we do a lot of things to try to provide drugs for patients that can't afford it. But there are certain patients that we are unable to do that based on the laws and the regulations, and in particular, most of Medicare Part D falls into that situation. And so I believe fundamentally we have to do two things. There are substantial discounts or rebates that are going into this system. Take Humira as an example. In the United States, there are rebates or discounts on that product that range from 87% down to 26%, okay? And it is the federal government that gets the highest form of discount or rebate on Humira, even though it represents a relatively small percentage of the volume, less than 20% of the overall volume. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't do more. But what we're asking is we do believe that there is a situation now where the copays for patients are such that it is extremely difficult for them to afford it. And what we're asking for is we, AbbVie, and I'm sure others here, would like to do more. There is more we can do to help patients afford their medicines, but we have to eliminate some barriers that are blocking that. Today, we give away 81,000 patients free drug. Half of those are Humira. Of those Humira patients, half of them are Medicare Part D. They're patients who make less than 500% of poverty, so they make less than $128,000 per year for a family of four. Those patients we can provide free drug for. Anybody above that, we can't. It's considered an inducement. We believe, and when you look at the copay for a drug like Humira, commercial patients, Medicaid patients, the LIS patient in Medicare pay less than $100 per year of copay for Humira. A standard Part D patient pays $5,500.
I'll do it.
They make $26,000. They can't afford it.
I apologize. I know I'm out of time. I know I'm out of time.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. Could I just, Sheldon, just make one point, which is, I think what we ought to be doing is figuring out how people don't have to cut their prescription drugs in half, and that would be a worthy goal for this committee and the people on this panel.
Senator Whitehouse.
I'd like to ask about a particular segment of the pharmaceutical market. Chairman Grassley opened his remarks by talking about patients taking a drug that has no competition as being a cause for concern. Mr. Frazier, your testimony included the statement that price gouging by those who jack up the prices of off-patent drugs that have no competition is a problem. Let me ask if there's anyone on this panel who disagrees that there are de facto off-patent monopolies now in the pharmaceutical market. Does anybody disagree with that as a fact?
I don't disagree.
In fact, it's
There
true.
are. That's
there
what
are.
I was saying.
And indeed, is it also not true that sometimes these off-patent monopolies are used to impose monopoly pricing?
It is true, and I think the most egregious examples that we have seen recently have been exactly in that situation.
Does anybody disagree with that?
I agree.
Everybody agrees. Now, are there among those entities that are in that category with off-patent monopolies who are extracting monopoly pricing by virtue of that, entrants who aren't even really in the pharmaceutical industry?
There absolutely are. That's
They
why I
invest
said
nothing in R&D.
Exactly.
They don't even come from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes.
They're more or less corporate raiders who've bought something in order to jack up prices and take advantage of monopoly rents, correct?
There are many people like that.
There are many people like that. Does anybody disagree that that is a feature right now within the pharmaceutical market? Everybody agrees?
And I would add also, Senator, that they are not allowed to be part of the Pharma Association.
So here's the problem. It is not difficult, in my view, as a lawyer of many years and a prosecutor of many years, to prove the existence of a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
We have been proving the existence of de facto monopolies in courtrooms and in regulatory proceedings for decades. So we can identify where these monopolies exist. Even if you let all the ties go to the runner, so that wherever there's a real question, you throw that one out, there still would remain a significant population of entities where it is beyond dispute that they're pricing based on monopoly power. And as I look around, there is no place to address that. There is no organization in the federal government that is taking an interest in that. And it is the scandal, I view, of the pharmaceutical industry, and you guys take a hit for it. Here's the problem. When we try to do anything about that, the people you pay to lobby us here in Congress come out and say, nope, we can't do anything like that. That might look like price control. We are not interested in taking any look at this monopoly problem in your industry. I shouldn't even say it's in your industry, because I think a lot of these people are raiders into your industry who aren't really part of your industry. They don't really develop drugs. I see a lot of head nodding here. So help us solve at least that problem. You know, there are lots of other problems that we're going to have to look through with your pricing. Help us solve at least that problem. Turn off your lawyers and your lobbyists as antagonists when we try to solve that problem.
We will.
In fact, switch them on and say, let's figure out how we deal with these modern monopolists who aren't even really in the pharmaceutical industry.
I couldn't agree more. These people are at best, tone deaf, and at worst, abusive. I would also point out that there are companies here. I know, for example, my company, there's a very important cancer drug called Tice BCG. It was an invention of Merck. It's been off patent for many, many years. It's an incredibly essential drug for bladder cancer patients. A number of companies that were making it went out of the business. And so now we've had to double supply. Over the last 10 years, the cost of that drug has increased by $5. That's not how we make money at Merck. We make money at Merck by inventing new drugs that didn't exist before. It's those people, I think, that have contributed to the villainizing of an industry when the public can't distinguish those people from the research-based companies.
You all say that here. There's a lot of head nodding here. There's a lot of agreement here. When your lobbyists come Everybody's in, and they're not going to let anybody lose in all of this. We have got to at least cut off.
Thank you for telling me that, because I never knew that our lobbyists were opposed to that.
We have got no support for working against these monopoly
So, Senators, the message is very clear, and we're going to take very seriously the task.
Senator Brown came back, so he'll go ahead of Senator from Nevada. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for doing this hearing. Thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Senator Hassan for her questions on opioids. 11 people a day die in my state from opioid addiction, and there is a responsibility shared more widely than we sometimes say. I so appreciate Chairman Grassley's yes or no questions, and I appreciated the 7 of you going along with his yes or no, and I would like to ask a series of yes or no questions, and please keep it to yes or no. They really are yes or no questions. Mr. Gonzalez, start with you. Is it true that pharmaceutical industry benefits from U.S. taxpayer-funded research? Yes or no?
It is, yes.
Yes. Across each of you?
Yes.
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 Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is it true that no other nation invests more taxpayer dollars in basic research that directly and indirectly benefits the industry?
Yes.
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 I'm not sure I understood the question.
Is it true that no other nation on earth invests more taxpayer dollars in basic research?
Yes.
Is it proportional to GDP, Senator?
I'm not asking that, but that's close enough. Thank you. Is it true that the U.S. allows drug companies that the U.S. government allows drug companies the longest period of exclusivity on drugs, on biologics? I'm sorry, on biologics. Mr. Gonzalez?
I believe that's true.
Yes.
I believe that's true.
I believe that's true.
Yes.
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 We know Medicare limits prices with doctors and hospitals. Is it true that Medicare cannot negotiate to lower prices with drug companies?
That is true directly, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Other agents work on their behalf to negotiate, but they do not negotiate directly.
Yes, they can negotiate
Dr.
directly.
Borla? Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Is it true U.S. taxpayers subsidize pharmaceutical advertising and marketing activities through the tax code's business expense deduction? Mr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, no different from any other advertisement, but yes.
Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay. We know the United States is the world's largest market for pharmaceuticals. Is it true that we pay the highest, in the overwhelming number of cases, is it true that we pay the highest drug prices in the world, Mr. Gonzalez?
The average government price, that would not be the case.
No, that we as Americans individually pay the highest drug prices in the world.
As an average, that would be true.
Okay, Mr. Schmidt.
I'm not sure that it would be true, Senator, because the generic prices are some of the lowest in the world, and government prices for many of our drugs, even before patent expiry, are sometimes as low as Europe or lower. So on average, probably it's true, but there are many different.
I know there are exceptions. I'm looking for averages. Dr. Cafaro?
Yes, on average, I would say.
Ms. Talbert?
I would say that the list prices are higher, but the net price in the United States is more comparable to much of the pricing outside the U.S.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes, outside Medicaid and other things, yes.
Okay.
9 out of 10 products in the U.S. are generics. So the pricing of the generic products is much lower in the U.S. than other countries.
Yeah, but generic.
But you are right.
Branded.
Don't confuse generic numbers of drugs sold with cost of in the aggregate. Your answer?
No, but 9 in 10, I'm telling you. But you are right that in the innovation, the prices outside the U.S. in many cases is much higher.
So I would agree with that. Patented drug, yes. Generic, no.
Okay, thank you. Last question. Is it true that drug manufacturers set what Ms. Talbert talked about, list prices? Is it true that you, the drug manufacturers, set those list prices?
That is correct.
That is correct, but of course, there is a negotiation that takes place with PBMs and insurers about the price and the rebate level.
Dr. Ford?
It's true for list price, but the delta between list and next price is the highest in the U.S.
Correct. Yes, we set the list price.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes, we set list price.
Actually, I wouldn't agree that we set the list price. It is the result of a major negotiation. And I have to say that the problem in the US healthcare system is that everything is geared around list price, a lot of incentives, which creates a hydraulic effect for the list prices to go down. I would be very happy to have much less list prices and the same net.
Dr. Brandenburg, you
But
said this.
ultimately, we set the listing price.
Okay, thank you. So taxpayers subsidize your research, subsidize your marketing. You continue to raise drug list prices on them. The median income of a person on Medicare is $26,000 a year. The average annual cost for a single specialty medication was more than $52,000 in 2015. Americans can't afford to pay for prescription drugs that cost more money than they make in a year. We can't continue to give Big Pharma the blank check that you've had to pay for high-priced prescription drugs. But I guess it isn't surprising that big drug companies take all the taxpayer money they can. What's so troubling is that this Congress continues, because of the lobbyists that Senator Whitehouse talked about, and other pressures, that this Congress continues to allow you to do so.
Senator
Thank you
Moss,
for answers.
Senator from Nevada. Turn your microphone on. Or maybe it's not working. Can you share with somebody else's microphone? Yeah. Thank you for moving.
Yep, you got it. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for this important hearing, one of four. Let me follow up on Senator Brown's line of questioning. Do any of you invest more in R&D than you spend on marketing administration? And if we could start yes or no to the right here.
Nope.
No.
More to spend on R&D versus
invest
marketing?
more in R&D than you spend on marketing and administration? Do you
Yes.
invest more in R&D than you do on marketing?
On marketing, but not if you include general administration,
Yeah.
facilities, and all of that stuff. But yes, more than marketing.
Okay.
I would correct my answer also.
So if
it is only marketing, yes.
Then
Yes,
more in R&D.
More R&D.
Let's just do marketing.
Yes, we spend 86% more in R&D than we do on sales and marketing.
Okay.
Yes, we do. More on R&D.
Some more than marketing, but excluding administrative costs, I guess.
Significantly more in R&D than sales and marketing.
But if you included administration with the marketing, that would be the reverse. Is that correct? Yes?
Correct. That is correct.
Yes, yes, yes?
It's
For
about
everyone?
tied at Merck.
Okay. So let me just ask this question. Apart from New Zealand, nowhere else in the world will you see drug ads on television. And I've asked this question for some of you. My understanding is the answer that I've been giving is that you maintain that television ads are a critical public health tool that helps patients identify their symptoms and seek treatment. Would you all agree with that? Is that a yes? No? Why do we have television ads when it comes?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Is that why? Yes?
Yes, no.
Is that a yes?
Made it easier, man.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so if you maintain that television ads are a critical public health tool, then how can it be if our health outcomes are not significantly better than in those countries where it's outlawed? So
Maybe
that's
I can-
what I don't understand, please.
Thank you, and you're raising a very good point. I think that healthcare outcomes and life expectancy, there is a lot of factors that influence it. For example, exercise, diet, lifestyle, and I feel that our nation needs to improve a lot in many of these cases. But I can assure you, Senator, that if you get cancer or another serious disease, you want to be treated in this country.
Okay.
There is no comparison.
All right. So let me jump back then to this discussion on authorized generics. And I'm trying to understand this, I think, along with all of my colleagues, to address this and how we reduce the costs and get the drugs in the hands of the people that need them, that actually, where the R&D came in, where they were created for individuals who actually need the drugs. I want to ask about the concept of authorized generics. Those are, as you know, are the drugs that are identical to the brand, manufactured by the brand, but marketed without the brand on its label. Yet the companies, my understanding, keep selling the higher cost brand drug to consumers who, according to press reports, don't realize that the same product from the same company is available at a better price. All of you manufacture authorized generics to maintain your market share once your patent expires. Is that true?
Nope.
That's not true.
We do have authorized generics.
We do have authorized generic, but we don't do it with the goals that you just highlighted.
So you do have authorized generics?
Yeah, we often.
Do all of you have authorized generics?
For some brands.
Okay.
Very selectively.
Very selectively.
We don't.
You don't?
I don't believe we do.
You do not have authorized. So for those of you that have authorized generics, explain to me, if you do have those, why do you continue selling the brand?
Okay, so in our case, when we've had authorized generics, we have allowed a third party to bring a generic product to market. And the issue that you're really getting to, again, is the issue that Senator Cassidy talked about. It's transparency. At the end of the day, if patients really understood what their options were, they wouldn't make these choices, but we have an opaque system, which is something that I think we've got to change. We've got to empower patients to be able to choose the cheapest medication, and Merck strongly supports generics. That's why I said in my introduction, we will never use coupons when there's a generic.
What are you doing to empower the patients? What are you
sorry?
doing to empower the patients to understand that the generics are out there?
It's very hard. We don't connect with the patients in all those situations. That's why there's legislation saying, for example, that pharmacists must tell patients at the counter what the cheapest alternative is for them at the counter.
So you rely on others to tell.
Yeah, we don't meet them at the counter, Senator.
So let me ask one final question, because I'm running out of time here. I want to get a sense from all of you, some of what types of policies you could support. I've heard some of those, but let me ask you this. Democrats have proposed to require manufacturers to submit advanced justification for price hikes that outpace inflation and make that information public. Given that many of you have already committed to tapering price hikes, is this something you could support? Yes or no?
We can support such a legislation, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
We're very supportive of increased pricing transparency. Advanced notification can cause problems in the supply chain and could cause outages for certain states. So we're very supportive of the notion of transparency. Advanced notification can be problematic.
Okay.
We disclose our price increases.
Okay.
We support you.
We would support it, but we'd like to see consistency. As you probably know, California has that right now, but so if we had a consistent standard that we operated with, that would certainly be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Senator Daines.
Incentivize the system here to deliver a lower price ultimately for the consumer, as well as incentivizing innovation. As manufacturers, you're responsible for setting this list price, this ethereal list price. But the more I've been hearing what's going on here today, I'm convinced we probably should call this the asking price. I'm sure list price is a bit of a misnomer, because after these I thought it was an elk bugling, Mr. Chairman, but it wasn't a microphone here. We'll try again. But after hearing all about coupons, rebates, discounts, the pricing volatility, you know, I spent 13 years at Procter & Gamble. And once upon a time, we drove a business with a lot of coupons, with rebates, pricing incentives. It was a very elastic pricing model. Oftentimes, you have a high-margin business. There's elasticity in the pricing, and you're an example of that. I spent 12 years in the cloud computing business after that, where the margins are even higher, where you see great volatility in pricing and elasticity in pricing. We eventually, years ago, of course, went to the everyday low-price EDLP model that, again, may or may not apply to pharma, but it was just trying to take out all of that in between the manufacturer and the consumer, sometimes nonsense that was going on, that was lacking transparency. And ultimately, I think the consumer was not winning in that equation because the prices, they weren't seeing really the true everyday low price. There's a lot of perverse incentives in the system today, best I can tell. So my question is, who pays list price?
Frazier? Unfortunately, the patient at the end, at the pharmacy counter, is probably one of the few paying the least price.
There's a small percentage of people who have no insurance who could actually be charged the list price.
So the people who can afford it the least, arguably, are paying list price.
Yes, Senator, that to me is what I meant by saying, in some ways, the reimbursement system here is regressive. The people who can least afford it are paying the most.
Does
and the
anybody think
sickest
that's a
people are
good
paying.
system?
I do not. I can tell you, that is, to me, the biggest problem that we have as a country, is we now have a system where the poorest and the sickest are subsidizing others.
Okay, so with insurance companies that now own the PBMs and the supply chain from the time you list the price until the consumer eventually gets it, is it fair to say the list price is really a starting point for then a negotiation?
Yes.
Anybody disagree with that premise?
No.
So what are some of the incentives, and maybe we'll start with Mr. Frazier, what are the incentives that contribute to high list prices that are being paid by those who can afford it the least?
The real answer, Senator, is if you went back a few years ago, when we negotiated to get our drugs on formulary, our goal was to have the lowest copay by patients. Today, the goal is to pay into the supply chain the biggest rebate. And so that actually puts the patient at a disadvantage since they're the only ones that are paying a portion of the list price. The list price is actually working against the patient.
So why do we have a system today where you all are setting, I'll just say, very, very high list prices, which is a starting point for negotiation? Why?
We're trying to get, Senator, we're trying to get formulary position with those list price, high rebates. It's a preferred position. Unfortunately, that preferred position doesn't automatically ensure affordability at the end of the
Senator, if you bring a product to the market with a low list price in this system, you get punished financially and you get no uptake because everyone in the supply chain makes money as a result of a higher list price.
I had a whistling microphone, Mr. Chairman Grassley, if I could just ask a follow-up question here, and that is the GAO report said that generics might fall 20% for each new generic entrant into the market. I appreciate the chairman's efforts here with the CREATES Act. It's going to crack down on some of these bad actors that block or delay competing generic drugs from entering the market. I've co-sponsored the bill, and I think that'll help us provide better access to low-cost generics. Here's my question. Has your company ever withheld samples from generic manufacturers?
No.
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 No, I don't think so, no.
All right. Do you believe the CREATES Act would be a positive step forward ensuring generics are entering the market in a timely fashion? Love to poll the team here.
I said in my testimony, legislation like the CREATES Act would be positive in that regard.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
We are supportive.
J&J as well?
Yeah, we're supportive of efforts to make sure that there are no abuses of that sample system.
Yeah. All right. I'm out of time now.
Senator Young.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to move to the issue of Medicaid best price. In the Trump administration's blueprint, they suggest that because drug manufacturers have to give Medicaid the best price on drugs, there's no incentive to offer deeper discounts to other payers, both government and commercial, than what's already offered under the Medicaid drug rebate program. So, first of all, I would ask each of you, is the Trump administration's assessment accurate?
In concept, I would say I understand the concept. In other words, if you have best price, you obviously have to be conscious of where that price is going because it's going to be compared against that. I would tell you in practice, because of the negotiation that occurs and the formula around Medicaid, I don't believe that that's actually today resulting in higher prices in the Medicare program.
You've anticipated my follow-up question, so I appreciate that. So the best price requirement doesn't encourage manufacturers to increase initial prices. Do you have thoughts on that?
I would say it doesn't necessarily encourage you to set a higher list price. I think what happens with list price is this negotiation you've heard going forward, where you're looking for a certain amount of impact to fall through, but the rebates and other aspects of the value chain in between absorb a large chunk of that, which drives list prices increases up higher.
Okay. Others?
I think where best price really is an issue, again, is it's a barrier to the kind of value-based pricing that we want to have in the marketplace, where if, for example, a drug didn't work, you might reimburse that payer for that unit, where that becomes a problem for value-based pricing.
Another example, Senator, is when you want to put on the market a second NDC like we did recently, right, with a much lower list price, then the best price potentially become a problem because it's calculated with the other version, the higher list price, which has stayed on the market. So that's something to pay attention to.
What changes, if any, if I could pivot a bit, would you suggest making to the program?
Senator, I believe that flexibility with value-based arrangements is really important, because I think we've all expressed a strong support for a system where we are paid based on the clinical results that our medicines produce in patients, and having greater flexibility to do that, it would be very, very important. It would be very valuable for patients. It would reduce healthcare costs overall.
In general agreement?
Yes, we agree.
Okay. So would you be willing to work with the administration on a different model, one you regard as more optimal?
Yeah, I think
yes.
yes. Please go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank you. With respect to reducing drug prices and the subsidies that U.S. payers provide with respect to research and development to much of the rest of the wealthy world, the President and the administration have gone so far as to issue proposals like the International Pricing Index, which you're all familiar with, to bring down prescription drug prices. So with the increased scrutiny of the industry and of the drug supply chain as a whole in the U.S., have any of your companies reevaluated your business strategy in foreign countries?
You know, that's a common question that we get asked. And the answer to that question is we do everything in our power to ensure that there is less freeloading by governments outside the United States. But the reality of the world is the greatest opportunity we have is to walk away. And that's really challenging when you have the kinds of essential medicines that make a big difference to people's lives. And frankly, they know that. They know that they can establish a price, and that ultimately what we have as an option is to walk away, leaving patients behind. I would also make the point that has been made several times here, that in the course of negotiating for reimbursement, often those countries take a very deliberate approach such that these medicines are available many years later than they are here. So they not only negotiate on a low price, but they actually provide very few of these medicines early on to their populations. If you look at, for example, lung cancer, where in this country now there's data showing that certain medicines can reduce the risk of death by 50% in newly diagnosed lung cancer patients, compare that to the UK, where people die regularly of lung cancer because they don't have these medicines.
Yes, Senator, I think it's important to keep in mind that all these investments, number one, creates a lot of very good jobs in the U.S. and economic value that really benefits the country. And second, it allows patients to get access to important new medicines much, much, much earlier than in Europe, for instance, sometimes 3-4 years before. And I share Mr. Fraser's comment here is that I have many examples that I could share where, you know, medicines that save lives are available here. We're still waiting in Europe.
Just three more questions. One from Senator, well, if some of you wanted to answer yet, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I mean, the only thing I would add is if we could evaluate a model where in the early days of HIV, where countries ultimately shared the burden, knowing that you would have to provide HIV at a very low cost in certain countries, there was a tiered pricing system that came through where, yes, the U.S. paid the highest price, but the Europeans paid a fairly significant price. For very important specialty medicines, if we could negotiate through trade or other mechanisms a way to be able to get a more balanced sharing of the investment that's made, not keeping all of that burden on the U.S., because the U.S. does bear the bulk of the burden of innovation in our business. That is absolutely true.
So it's a really interesting idea. If you or your team are aware of any academic papers you might bring to my attention.
That's the end.
Tease that out. Thank you, Chairman.
That's the end.
Yeah.
Now, you have three questions. One from Senator Wyden, then Senator Cassidy, and me. And then that'll be it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be one question and then a very brief closer. And the question is for you, Mr. Gonzalez. I've got the company's proxy statement here, and financial disclosures show that you were paid $22.6 million in 2017, and that included a $4.3 million bonus. That's what I want to look at. On page 37 in this proxy statement, it says your bonus was tied to the financial performance of Humira, and it seems that was the case in 2015 and 2016. That strikes me as problematic since AbbVie reported that the higher prices in the U.S. were responsible for increasing sales of Humira. Would you make a smaller bonus if you dropped the price of Humira?
Humira was one element of a set of financial factors that were evaluated as part of my compensation. It's obviously a very significant product for us, so it's clear that it would be part of that evaluation.
I'd like that in writing. It looks to me like you'd be making a smaller bonus if you drop the price of Humira. I'd like that in writing within 10 days. My last point, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate being able to do this for a closer, is that I've heard a lot of happy talk this morning. Things like, well, if you get rid of rebates, drug prices are going to go down. But what people are taking away from this hearing, I've seen it said and reported, well, no firm commitments have been made to lower list prices. So I'm just going to tell you what I would like in writing is I would like an answer in writing to the question, if rebates go away, will you support a black letter law that requires that you reduce list prices by the amount of the rebate? I'm going to get that to you right away. I would like an answer within 10 days because that's right at the heart of this issue, and after the happy talk is over, that's what's really going to help people at pharmacy counters from sea to shining sea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again. This has been incredibly provocative. And if there's a tension here, the tension is how do we support innovation, but at the same time make it that the patient can afford that innovation. Mr. Fraser, you may have guessed that it seems like we have a mirror image in my mind. Either the plans impose a price or the government impose a price. But either way, the side having imposed upon is not very wild about that. And you just mentioned to Todd Young that you can walk away. If France offers you too low a price, you just walk away from France. The UK doesn't have a deal right now. But in some areas, Medicare cannot walk away. So it's back to that mirror image. And you started to say something, and I was out of time. But my question is, in the 6 protected classes, and if there's a new drug like Sovaldi was at the beginning, right now the commercials can walk away, the commercials can delay, but Medicare cannot. So help me resolve this. How do we give the patient, the taxpayer, the same sort of tools that, and by the way, CBO says unless you can walk away, negotiations won't lower prices.
Okay. So my point was, for all practical purposes, we cannot walk away with our European colleagues, even though they give us low prices, because we think it would be immoral to leave those patients.
Now, some of your colleagues have because there's drugs not yet available in UK.
Yeah. Well, now that's the problem with the UK is that they delay, just like they can set the price, they delay when they put the drug on the market. It's the UK's delay, it's not our delay. So I want to clarify that point. But coming back to your 6 protected classes, those protected classes are there because many, many sick, vulnerable people need medicines in those classes. And we believe that there are ways of lowering the prices, stimulating innovation without violating the compact that was around those 6 protected classes because patients are particularly needing those medicines.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but I'm not sure that's, you know, that seems almost status quo, and status quo's kind of not working. But again, thank you all very much, and I thank you again for your innovation.
I would add, Senator, that I believe the administration should try through trade agreements to protect the American innovation, because at large the pharmaceutical innovation is happening in this country. And right now, I think rightly, these price controls mechanisms of multiple developed countries, it is in reality a free riding on American innovation.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Are you done? Yes, sir. Yeah. My last question is very general, but I'd like to know if there are any policies affecting Medicaid or Medicare that are in your control to change. In other words, from the company level, is there anything in your control that you could change on Medicare or Medicaid? Start with you on my right here.
I don't think we can change directly any policy, Senator, on Medicare or Medicaid. We can talk about different solutions, but I don't think we can change, and we have the power to change.
But if you lowered your list price, it would help. That's one thing you could do.
If we were able to lower our list price, we would certainly help, again, the patient at the end and at the pharmacy to have copay which they can afford. However, we couldn't do that independently of a major reform because we would lose formulary placement if we were doing that in isolation, and especially in very competitive areas where you do have, you know, brands and generics, and again, I'm referring to the insulin markets which has become extremely competitive. That wouldn't work.
Yeah. Do you have anything to...
Mr. Chairman, I think the most impactful thing I can do right now it is to make the pledge that as leader of this company, of Pfizer, I would be taking very seriously the responsible pricing of our products. This is something that we have already started. Pricing in Pfizer in the past was growing mid-single digits, even more in some cases. This is not something that we continue doing. Pricing in Pfizer went down last year, went down this year, and when I spoke to our investors, not to the Senate, to our investors, I made it very clear that pricing will not be a growth driver for this company now or in the years to come. Why I think this is the most important? Because I think the tone is set from the top.
Okay, Mr. Frazier.
Senator, I understand the dissatisfaction with our industry. I understand why patients are frustrated because they need these medicines and they can't afford them. I would pledge to do everything that we could, but I would urge you to recognize that the system itself is complex and it is interdependent. And no one company can unilaterally lower list prices without running into financial and operating disadvantages that make it impossible to do that. But if we all bring the parties together around the table with the goal of doing what's best for the patient, I think we can come up with a system that works for all Americans. Thank you for giving us the time today.
I didn't mean to, for the rest of you, before you answer, I didn't mean to say list price. I just said, well, that's kind of obvious. Yeah, I didn't want to concentrate just on that, Mr.
We really want to be a part of the solution, and we want patients to be able to access and pay for the medicines that they so desperately need. So we do strongly advocate for rebate reforms that would allow us to lower our list prices that would then end up helping patients get access.
Yeah, Dr. Cafario.
Mr. Chairman, I would echo. Our perspective is that it starts with a very responsible and thoughtful approach to pricing and price increases. That's what Bristol-Myers Squibb does. The second point that I would like to make is that today we have discussed a number of very concrete policies, from addressing the issue of rebates to value-based pricing, supporting the development of a generic and biosimilar market, and you have my commitment that our company is looking forward to working with this committee and the administration to make sure that many of those policies can be enacted, because they would make a very big difference for our patients.
And Mr. Sarario.
Yeah, Senator, we actually cannot influence policy. What we can do is indeed apply reasonable pricing and also continue pushing for value-based pricing. But I'd like to make a general comment, which is that hopefully my colleagues will share this. This view is that I really don't think we are blaming anybody in the system. In the introduction, Senator Wyden thought that we're placing the blame on PBMs and others. I really don't think we're doing this. I think what it is that we are in a system that used to be fit for purpose and really drove enormous savings over the last few years, but is no longer fit for purpose. And it's one of those situations where nobody in the system can do anything, can fix it by themselves. The government has to step up and change the rules. And those rebates have to go.
Mr. Gonzalez.
I think I would agree with many of the points that were already raised. We as an industry have to continue to do everything we can to be responsible about pricing and both how we set pricing and price increases over time. I think we've seen a positive trend in that area. But ultimately, the final fixes here to realign the system appropriately would require legislative type changes. The only other thing I would say is, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are absolutely committed that no patient goes without medicine that they need of ours. And we have an extensive patient assistance program, but we are talking about how we more broadly ensure all patients understand they can get that support from us if they can't afford their medicines.
I want to inform all members of the committee that I'll put a deadline on March the 12th. If you have questions you want to submit to the panel for answers in writing. And then for you folks, after you get those questions, I hope you can get back to us very quickly. And so all of the people besides the witnesses who have attended either here or off-site for this hearing, I thank you for your interest in this issue. And I want to once again thank our witnesses for being here today and sharing your knowledge and expertise, and what I indicated that this is the start of a dialogue I hope to have with you so that we can correct some of these things that have been pointed out at this committee meeting that we think need to be corrected. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.